Chapter 741. The 9 types of powers surged in at the same time, yet there was no conflict between them at all. There was not even the slightest feeling of discomfort. The powers of the 9 phases merged and then separated again. It was still orderly and orderly. In the blink of an eye, the earth charm, sacred wood charm, invincible metal charm, and the other 7 cultivation methods that were lagging behind advanced with great strides like a hot knife through butter, leveling up by a level in an instant. Yin Yang's jaw almost dropped from shock at the change. What kind of advancement speed was this? It was too freakish. It was a pity that Yin Yang's surprise was destined to have a beginning but not an end. He would probably have to sit back and relax from the shock, because Yin Yang then realized that the previous round of cultivation base advancement was not the end, but the beginning. His cultivation progress could no longer be stopped once it started. As his cultivation method advanced rapidly, the endless spiritual qi from the outside world surged into his body like rivers flowing into the ocean. It was impossible to refuse, and it was even more impossible to stop. The 9 forces twisted into a rope, wrapping around Yin Yang and propelling him forward with unstoppable momentum. Yin Yang, who was in a delicate situation, could clearly feel that the barriers in his body that hindered his cultivation breakthrough were being unlocked one by one. The force of qi was unstoppable, but he had no control over his own body. He was extremely passive, like a third party outside of himself. He could only watch from the sidelines, unable to do anything more. Within his body, muffled sounds constantly rang out. That was the sound of hidden acupoints being opened one after another. The idea that there might be many hidden chakras in his body in the past had become a reality. They were being awakened one after another, becoming a channel for the advancement of his cultivation base. With each awakened chakra, there was a gush of spiritual qi that seemed to have found a new channel, surging into his body like mercury spilling onto the ground, pervasive. Yin Yang felt like he was in a fog. He was genuinely shocked and incredulous by everything that he was experiencing. Ever since the beginning of time in the Tianxian continent, or in other places like the bound of universe, or even in other realms, all profound qi cultivators had been cultivating their acupoints. Acupoints were naturally formed, and could not be increased or decreased. This was a universally acknowledged truth. Although it was said that there were some people with great luck who, under certain opportunities, could open 1 or 2 more acupoints on top of the original acupoints. However, this was a special case and not a fixed view. The fixed view of the world was that there were only 9 acupoints in the human body. This precedent had long been broken by Yin Yang. Not only had he awakened all 9 chakras, he had even awakened a few more chakras on top of that. His foundation was far beyond what the world knew. The situation now, however, was that the countless chakras in Yin Yang's body were being forcefully opened by the combined power of the 9 incarnations' powers like a hot knife through butter. Yin Yang did not understand or even know what was happening. He could only grit his teeth and persevere. My brothers will never harm me. This should be the inevitable process of the 9 supremes merging into one. The divine powers of the 9 supremes merged into one and forcefully entered his meridians, causing an extraordinary amount of pain. The agony of his body, his mind, and his deific consciousness were all intertwined. Every nerve fiber in his body was spasming in agony. From the nerves that were pulled by each strand of hair to the muscles that were pulled by his toenails, they were all cramping. They were all convulsing. In comparison, the pain of the physical body was simply insignificant. What was death by 1,000 cuts compared to the pain he was experiencing now? Compared to the pain he was experiencing now, Yin Yang felt that it was not much different from a mosquito bite. In spite of this, Yin Yang puffed out a breath and sat there, persevering. He firmly believed that the smooth path was in front of him. As long as he could make it, he would be fine. His brothers would never harm him. As Yin Yang persevered, the condition of his body changed again. Every 2 hours, his skin would rupture without warning. Countless thin lines of blood splattered out, turning the entire room crimson in a foggy haze. Later on, the process became even shorter. Correspondingly, the density of the spiritual energy in the room also increased, gradually forming liquid raindrops. In the end, it was like a torrential downpour of spiritual energy in this small room. It was like an endless spiritual chi storm washed over Yun Yang's body, replenishing his body's needs at the same time. Yun Yang's current state was like his entire being was disintegrating and reassembling and reassembling again and again. The process was completely uncontrollable and unstoppable. Yun Yang could only persevere and wait. He could not stop what was happening at the moment, so he could only persevere instinctively and continue to persevere. He would pass out occasionally, but he would be woken up by the pain in the next moment. He would pass out again and wake up again. Eventually, even short periods of unconsciousness became unattainable. His senses and sense of pain seemed to be magnified 10 times, 100 times more. Every bit of pain was magnified to its limit. He could feel the pain that was countless times more agonizing than death by 1,000 cuts, but he could only endure it passively without the option of giving up. If there was one thing that Yun Yang could still feel comforted about, it would be the fact that he was improving. He was improving at an unbelievable speed, becoming unprecedentedly powerful, and his strength was still growing. Yun Yang was suddenly struck by a thought. Why did Ji Lingxi only need to sleep for her ascension to happen naturally and smoothly? Yet, when it came to him, the process was F*King excruciating. Even though he had ascended, the process was F*King painful. People often said that happiness and pain went hand in hand, the best of life. Yin Yang's current state, the joy of increasing his ability in the agony of dying in a split second, were both equally interesting. Life was so messed up. The undeniable pain of not moving made Yun Yang neglect the fact that a gigantic tornado had formed above the residence of 9 Supremes when the 9 cultivation methods gathered in his body at the same time. The moment he cultivated, the sky above the residence of 9 Supremes had suddenly turned into a gigantic tornado. Wind had always been formless, but it was something that truly existed. The gigantic tornado above the residence of 9 Supremes was like a giant, transparent funnel, spinning rapidly as it soared into the sky. Wherever it passed, the clouds in the sky moved with it, sucked in with a whoosh. At this moment, the tornado seemed to have a tangible form. Chapter 742. Endless spiritual chi crossed the endless space, pouring into the tornado from above the 9 heavens and from all directions. Like rivers flowing into the ocean, it surged into the residence of 9 Supremes endlessly. The already thick fog in the residence of 9 Supremes grew as thick as water, almost solidifying into a solid substance. However, that huge amount of spiritual chi was still gathering and flowing continuously. The center of the residence of 9 Supremes was where Supreme Earth's room was located. It was also where the boundless spiritual chi converged. The spiritual chi rain that was pouring in the room came from. Yin Yang was still sitting on the chair that belonged to Supreme Earth, his eyes shut tight as he focused on cultivating. As time went on, not only did the giant tornado in the sky not wither, it grew in size instead. The spiritual chi that flowed into the 9 Supremes increased as well. The spiritual chi that washed over Yun Yang like a storm gradually turned from liquid to a more solid state. Countless wisps of white spiritual chi circled Yun Yang's body like little jubilant snakes, spinning merrily around him. With each spin, some of the snakes disappeared, but more white spiritual chi snakes joined in to fill in the gaps as they continued to spin. It continued to replenish and disappear, and the cycle began again and again, without end. The residence of 9 Supremes, which had been silent, was enveloped by the unprecedentedly dense fog, changing colors continuously. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and purple, all sorts of colors were present, constantly changing in a magnificent display. After some time, the entire Tiantang city was illuminated by the various colors of the residence of 9 Supremes, as if the city was plated with a layer of glamorous colors. It was as if some peerless treasure had suddenly appeared in the middle of a dark night, illuminating the universe and adding color to the world, filling it with an eerie, radiant atmosphere. However, it was daytime now. How could this be? No one in the vast capital city of Tiantang City could not see this sight. It was not only visible within thousands of miles of Tiantang City, but it was also slowly expanding. As a day passed, the area gradually covered the entire Yutong's territory. Even those who were tens of thousands of miles away from Tiantang City could clearly see the dazzling colors. Then, the color of the sky began to slowly change again. From dusk, the color gradually darkened and turned blue. Finally, it turned into the purest purple. Under the heavens, there was nothing that wasn't like this. There were no more stars or moons that could enter one's eyes. Like a huge dark purple emerald, the night sky that should have been dark and gloomy was replaced by the night sky. Above this purple sky, in a place where no one could see, endless eastern purple chi came from the eastern horizon. It swarmed over, covering the sky and covering the earth as it rushed over. Countless people who witnessed this scene were astounded. They stared at the unprecedented phenomenon with their mouths agape and eyes wide open. In the residence of Yun, Ji Lingxi sprung up and stared in the direction of the residence of 9 Supremes, bewildered. Why is there such a commotion? Has something big happened? A silhouette flashed by his side, and Yun Xiaoyao's tall figure abruptly appeared in the air. His face was heavy with worry as he looked at the source of the light, his lips pressed tightly together. He closed his eyes and tried his best to conceal his concern and anxiety. But now, he could no longer control his thoughts and emotions. The corners of his mouth twitched uncontrollably, and his head was drenched in sweat. Can you still hold on? He couldn't hold on. What had actually happened? Why did the residence of 9 Supremes, which had been quiet for a long time, suddenly cause such a huge commotion? Ji Lingxi asked curiously, Uncle Yun, is the commotion here related to Yun Yang? Yun Xiaoyao stood quietly in the air, his eyes glued to the colorful glow. He did not hear a single word that Ji Lingxi had said even though she was just inches away from him. It was as if he did not hear her at all. Ji Lingxi looked at Yun Xiaoyao in shock and suddenly bit her lip. I'll go take a look. By the time Yun Xiaoyao came back to his senses and opened his eyes, Ji Lingxi was already far away. He could not help hollering, "Don't be rash. Don't go over." The holler was like a bolt from the blue, reverberating 10 miles away. Although Ji Lingxi was fast, she was still caught by the roar. Initially, with Ji Lingxi's current cultivation base, Yun Xiaoyao's roar did not faze her, even though it was powerful and extraordinary. However, Yun Xiaoyao's other identity as Yun Yang's father was obviously more intimidating. She was so frightened that she could not help but stop and turn to look. Judging from the commotion over there, I'm afraid there's an unknown danger. Let's take a look first. Yun Xiaoyao's eyes were filled with anxiety and anguish, but he still stared at Ji Lingxi and said word by word, the residence of 9 Supremes does not allow anyone to go near it now. Anyone who goes near will be punished by heaven. His words were spoken with extreme gravity. Huh? Ji Lingxi exclaimed at once and asked anxiously, then, is he all right? Yun Xiaoyao did not answer for a long time, only staring into the distance in a daze. After a long time, he murmured, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. His voice was indescribably determined. We only need to wait patiently and observe the situation. He'll definitely come back safely. As long as he comes back, this world will be the moment of change. Yun Xiaoyao sucked in a deep breath. Beads of sweat trickled down his hands that were clasped behind his back where Ji Lingxi could not see. It was caused by excessive nervousness, even his fists were clenched so tightly that they were sweating profusely. As the saying went, those who could heal would not heal themselves. Those who advised others to wait patiently and observe the situation might not necessarily be calm and patient. His Majesty was chatting with Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian. Are you saying that Wu Ying is actually so capable? I've really underestimated him in the past. The Emperor asked. His talent is even greater than what we've told him. The only word that can describe him is that he's a master of the universe. Qiu Jianhan nodded heavily, praising Yun Che as much as he could. Just as Fang Qingtian was about to say something in response, he froze. What is this? All three of them turned to look in unison, only to see a myriad of colors appearing in midair, dazzling and resplendent. The source, His Majesty stood up abruptly and strode to the window. He could not help but exclaim, "The residence of 9 Supremes? Has the residence of 9 Supremes caused a commotion?" The two big shots turned silent at the same time. Where else could it be other than the residence of 9 Supremes in the entire Tiantang city that could cause such a commotion? How could this be? The residence of 9 Supremes has never caused such a commotion before. Is it a warning from heaven? His Majesty frowned and said, or, is it Supreme Cloud? Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian did not speak. They really did not know what had happened. Such an earth-shattering phenomenon. What is Supreme Cloud trying to do? Or are there other heretics plotting against us? His Majesty stood up abruptly. Come, let's go take a look. Chapter 743. Of course, they had to go and take a look. In spite of this, the two elders were feeling anxious as well. At this delicate juncture, when the army has set off to conquer Zio and lay the foundations of our ambitions, the residence of 9 Supremes has suddenly undergone such a change. Is it a curse or a blessing, a golden opportunity or a crisis? Why? His Majesty spoke as they walked out. His words sounded like he was talking to himself. The two elders knew that there was no need for them to answer. If such a commotion is caused by Supreme Cloud, if Supreme Cloud actually possesses such power, doesn't that mean that he has the power of an immortal in the truest sense? On the other hand, if such a commotion is caused by the heretics who don't care about the will of heaven, doesn't it mean that the residence of 9 Supremes is facing an unprecedented test? His Majesty murmured, regardless of which, it all points to the same thing. The so-called secular imperial power is something that Supreme Cloud, or a true Almighty, can destroy with a raise of his hand? This sentence was rather sensitive. Qiu Jianhan's expression was equally conflicted as he said slowly, the secular imperial power, the so-called power to rule the world, has never been in Supreme Cloud's eyes. Isn't this something we all know? This was the truth. The 9 Supremes had long been a living legend in the hearts of Yutang's subjects and people. Their prestige had long surpassed the imperial power. It was just that the Emperor of Yutang knew the true meaning of the 9 Supremes' establishment, so he did not mind it at all. This throne has never been in the 9 Supremes' eyes. His Majesty mused, a thought suddenly rising in his mind. Let us go there and take a look. His Majesty made up his mind and hastened his steps. Your Majesty. You've said it yourself. The commotion at the residence of 9 Supremes could be caused by the heretics. It's better to wait until the matter is settled before we go. It's all right. We'll only watch from afar this time, we won't really get close. Even if it's really the heretics who are causing trouble at the residence of 9 Supremes, I don't think they'll lay a hand on us. The Emperor's expression was rather complicated and melancholy as he said, My dear Minister Qiu, you may not know this, but right now, I have a vague feeling that perhaps after today, we will never see the residence of 9 Supremes again. Just as His Majesty stepped out of the hall, the entire sky suddenly turned purple. The entire sky was like a pure, dark purple jade that was tens of millions of miles in size, inlaid in the sky. Endless sea. The surface of the sea, which had always been calm, suddenly became turbulent, and golden light flickered. With a whoosh, the waves soared into the sky, reaching thousands of feet high. Golden light flashed in the sky, and more than 10 figures appeared in the sky, standing on the waves. They stared at the deep purple color in the sky, and suddenly roared towards the sky. The seal is finally broken. The wheel of the era has begun once again. I'm waiting for my destiny. The winds and clouds of the world are finally moving. Go to the Xianhuang world. This time, I must seize this opportunity. More than a dozen figures waved their sleeves and soared into the sky, disappearing in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the 1,000-foot-tall wave crashed down, followed by a tsunami, in a hidden valley somewhere. Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou, who had just gone through a great chase, as well as the severely injured Gu Chaoyang and Feng Xiang'e, stood up immediately as well, gazing at the sky for a long time. They were less than 3,000 miles away from Tiantang City. If the four of them had been in perfect condition and sprinted at full speed, they could have rushed back in 4 hours at most. However, they did not have the strength to do so now. The four of them looked at the sudden change of heaven and earth, astonishment written all over their faces. Ling Xiaozui was astonished, shocked, doubtful, and puzzled by the sudden change, so was Du Guchou. In spite of this, Feng Xiang'e's eyes were gleaming as a massive aura flashed across him. Gu Chaoyang, on the other hand, was the most shocked among the four of them. He stared at the sky, dumbstruck, before he began to tremble. Lowering his head, he stared at the purple jade flute in his hand in a daze. After a while, he cried out involuntarily, "It's too late." Du Guchou turned around abruptly. "Too late? What's too late?" Gu Chaoyang stomped his feet and said, "We can't make it back to Tiantang City in time. Oh God, what should we do? We've actually missed this great opportunity because of our stubbornness." His frustrated expression looked like he was about to tear his own head off. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. "What's going on? How is this a great opportunity?" asked Ling Xiaozui. Gu Chaoyang suddenly grabbed Ling Xiaozui's hand, his expression extremely serious. "Old Ling. You are the only one who can help us right now. You must help me." When he said, "You must help me," Gu Chaoyang's expression turned menacing. "What's going on? How can I help you if you don't explain yourself?" asked Ling Xiaozui. Now that so many things had happened, Gu Chaoyang had successfully cleared his suspicion. Not only was Ling Xiaozui no longer suspicious of him, he was also almost defenseless. Currently, they were truly sworn brothers of life and death. If he could help, of course, he would not refuse. However, Gu Chaoyang had spoken so solemnly that even though Ling Xiaozui had decided to help, he still had to ask for clarification. "Please." Gu Chaoyang's face was filled with determination. With a sudden flick of his wrist, he passed the purple jade flute in his hand over. The group had seen the purple jade flute in Gu Chaoyang's hand many times throughout this period of time they had spent together, so they did not feel much about it. However, when they looked at it again now, they were shocked to realize that the color of the purple jade flute was actually the same as the purple that had coalesced in the sky. There was no difference at all. "Please, you must hurry to Tiantang City at the fastest speed and throw this purple jade flute into the residence of 9 Supremes. Please." Gu Chaoyang offered the purple jade flute with both hands and dropped to his knees with a thud. "This incident concerns the welfare of this world. My personal fate is inconsequential, but I beg of you. You must go as fast as you can. Even if you have to risk your life, there mustn't be a moment of delay. You must make it." Ling Xiaozui was shocked by Gu Chaoyang's action. There's really no time to explain now." Gu Chaoyang was burning with anxiety. "Please, you must believe me, or else, it's all over." The purple jade flute glowed and shimmered like it was responding to the purple hue in the sky. It looked like it could soar into the sky at any time. "What is it?" Ling Xiaozui frowned. "Can't you let me know?" Gu Chaoyang was so anxious that he did not know what to say. He stomped his feet and said, "Stop nagging, go quickly. I beg you, go quickly. The 9 Supremes have returned. The 9 Supremes have returned." Chapter 744. Hearing the 4 words, Ling Xiaozui was stunned, and so was Du Guchou. The 9 Supremes return, the earth will split and the sky will be overturned, the martial world and the world will be reigned supreme. These 4 phrases were widespread, too many people had heard of them. While they were not universally known, they were well known. To experts like Ling Xiaozui, however, they did not think much of it. After all, they were already at the pinnacle of this world, boasting that they knew the cultivators of this world like the back of their hands. The 9 supreme supernatural powers were remarkable, but they were still within the limits of this world. It was too much to expect them to split the earth and turn the sky upside down. However, when these 4 phrases came from Heaven's Inquisition, Gu Chaoyang's mouth, it was different from the past. At least, it was different for Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou. There must be a deeper meaning behind it. Feng Xiang'e, who was standing aside, had a glint in his eyes as he said with a smile, "The 9 Supremes return." He said curiously, "The 9 Supremes return is the 9 Supremes matter after all. What does it have to do with your purple jade flute? Could it be that the great destiny you spoke of just now is all tied to this flute?" As he spoke, he reached out to take it. Gu Chaoyang had intended to pass the purple jade flute to Ling Xiaozui and send it to the residence of 9 Supremes in Tiantang City as soon as possible. He did not hold it in his hand as usual, but propped it on his palm. He was kneeling on the ground, waiting for Ling Xiaozui's action. Ling Xiaozui, on the other hand, was deep in thought and had yet to snap out of it. Naturally, he could not take it in time. Feng Xiang'e's timely move seemed slow but was actually fast. It was so fast that before the 3 experts could think of stopping him, he had already grabbed one end of the purple jade flute. Gu Chaoyang was quick to react, grabbing the other end almost instinctively. He cried out anxiously, "What are you doing? Take it back." Feng Xiang'e said with a smile, "It's only a purple jade flute. Why are you so anxious? Could there really be some hidden secret? Let me take a look." His words were spoken with a smile, but his hands were firm as he exerted his strength. Gu Chaoyang could only feel an immense force that he could no longer hold on to the purple jade flute. His hand was empty as the flute was snatched away by Feng Xiang'e. Gu Chaoyang panicked, spitting a mouthful of blood as he hissed, "Feng Xiang'e! You!" He turned to look at Ling Xiaozui and roared anxiously, "What are you waiting for? It's over. It's over." Ling Xiaozui turned his head abruptly. There was really no time to consider anything now. He stretched his arm out to Feng Xiang'e and said, "Give it to me." His eyes were gleaming with a sharp glint. At a time like this, he instinctively chose to believe in Gu Chaoyang. Gu Chaoyang's actions earlier had already indicated that the matter was of great importance and could not be messed up. Even a moment of delay would be a sin. Moreover, Feng Xiang'e had been severely injured earlier. His current condition should be the weakest among the 4 of them. He should not have the ability he currently possessed. It was already very suspicious. Feng Xiang'e chuckled. "Brother Ling, why are you doing this? It's just a flute. Don't tell me that with our friendship, looking at it and fiddling with it for a while, what's there to fight over?" Clang! It was the sound of a long sword being unsheathed. Feng Xiang'e turned to look at the source of the sound and saw Du Guchou holding a long sword in his hand. His gaze was chilling as well, already in a stance where he was one with his sword. His eyes were staring at Feng Xiang'e like 2 beams of sword light that could tear through the heavens as he said in a low voice, "Give it to me." Feng Xiang'e seemed to be enraged as he hollered, "What is this? What are you doing? The 2 of you are simply unreasonable. Are you really coveting this so-called great opportunity?" He held the purple jade flute in his hand, seeming to be infuriated. "We've gone through so many life and death situations together. Are you actually going to attack me just because of some ridiculous nonsense? Humph. What 9 Supremes unite? Watch me destroy this flute first to cut off your delusions. Otherwise, your cultivation journey will be ruined if your state of mind is flawed." He gripped one end of the purple jade flute and snapped it downwards resolutely with a huff. "How dare you!" Gu Chaoyang was furious. Ling Xiaozui unsheathed his sword and pointed it between Feng Xiang'e's brows as well, hollering, "Hand over the jade flute, it's not too late." The chilliness hit him in the face, causing the muscles on Feng Xiang'e's face to twitch. It chilled him like he was submerged in an icy spring. He lifted his head slowly, looking at Ling Xiaozui in disbelief before glancing at Du Guchou. His rage intensified as he hollered, "You're willing to go against your conscience when you see an opportunity? Do you want to attack me? Come on. Both of you, come at me together. Let's see if I'm afraid." Gu Chaoyang exclaimed, "Quick, it's too late." Feng Xiang'a channeled his mystical energy, holding the purple jade flute as he said, "Come. Win me, and you can have this purple jade flute." Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou frowned at the same time but did not make a move. If they were to really fight, what Gu Chaoyang had said would be too late, no matter what would happen next. Feng Xiang's current demeanor, in particular, could very well destroy the purple jade flute the moment they clashed. He could even borrow the combined force of both of them to destroy the treasure. "Feng Xiang'a, who are you? Why do you have to pretend when things have come to this?" The sharpness in Ling Xiaozui's gaze grew sharper. Chapter 745. It was not Feng Xiang'a. This was an obvious fact now. Feng Xiang'a should have been severely injured. Even if he was healthy, he still would not have had the ability to withstand Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou's full force attack, what more when they joined forces. Not only could this person before them, this fake Feng Xiang'a, go head-on against both of them, he had only been injured. Both of them still had to withstand the counterattack. It was not a pleasant experience. Based on this capability alone, he had to be at least a master of the same level as Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou. Otherwise, it would have been impossible. Feng Xiang'a, who was in midair, was bleeding from his 7 orifices as he spat a mouthful of blood. He staggered but managed to regain his footing several hundred feet in the air. Coughing, he said with a chuckle, "This purple jade flute is not bad. It hasn't shattered even after being pushed to the limit. It's worthy of me. I'll accept it." Before his words echoed in the air, he had already set his stance. It was obvious that he was going to soar into the air and travel 1,000 miles away. Ling Xiaozui let out another deep roar like a dragon, a look of determination on his face. The other party could still move so freely after taking on both of their attacks. His capability was more than just powerful. Ling Xiaozui could vaguely guess this person's true identity. However, he did not expect that this person would choose to reveal himself now after disguising himself for so long. He did not even hesitate to abandon their original plan. The only reason was to stop the 9 Supremes from reuniting. Then, the other party must be Mr. Nian. The 4 Seasons Tower's true top person, the one and only Mr. Nian, the real Mr. Nian. Only he would view the reuniting of the 9 Supremes with such importance. The instantaneous realization left Ling Xiaozui with no other options left to him. Now that things had come to this, there was no other way to keep this terrifying enemy here other than self-destructing his sword core and perishing together. Sword energy whizzed, filling the air with desolation. Just as Ling Xiaozui was about to soar with his sword and unleash his maximum strength to fight for his life, he suddenly stopped what he was about to do. A shocking change had occurred before his eyes. In midair, Feng Xiang'a, who had fled hundreds of feet away with the purple jade flute, suddenly cried out. As he trembled, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The purple jade flute, which was supposed to be held tightly in his hand, fell out of his hand. Then, Feng Xiang'a, who was in midair, cried out again. His body trembled even more violently. His black hair suddenly turned white, then snow-white. In the blink of an eye, it had fallen off completely. However, that person was not in the mood to pay attention to his own condition. His entire mind was focused on what was in front of him, as if he had seen a ghost. In front of him was the purple jade flute. At this moment it was suspended in midair, and its entire body was overflowing with an extremely noble purple color. It was like the emperor of the sky, looking down on the world. Elegant and calm. Inviolable. With a slight tilt, the purple jade flute, which was still emitting a colorful purple aura, began to slowly descend. A voice seemed to come from beyond the 9 heavens. It was elegant, ethereal, and unfathomable, but it showed the calmness of looking down on the world. Blowing through the lake waters of the 9 heavens, only the purple jade flute in my hand. In the sky, Feng Xiang'e watched the falling purple jade flute indignantly. However, with a flash of sword light, Dugu Chou had already taken off with his sword, his target Feng Xiang'e. With a loud cry, Feng Xiang'e turned into a ray of light and soared into the sky, vanishing in a flash. This person obviously knew that he could not continue. Putting aside the fact that he had just endured Ling Xiaozui and Dugu Chou's combined attack and was severely injured, the damage caused by the purple jade flute's mutation had further reduced his combat strength. If he did not leave immediately, he would be in danger of being killed. Although the person was escaping at a high speed, Dugu Chou and Ling Xiaozui's eyes could still see that the imposter Feng Xiang'e had aged a few more years in an instant. Perhaps 100 years of his lifespan had been drained away, and his hair and beard had all fallen off. Age spots had appeared on his face as well, and his entire body was beginning to exude an aura of old age. His hands were like dried chicken claws. It was as if the change just now, a strange force had sucked away a large part of his vitality. Even if he had managed to escape, it was only a dying old man. Looking at his condition, he might not be able to live for more than 3 days. He was only left with the last struggle to prolong his life. Don't chase after him. Gu Chaoyang cried out hysterically, go send the flute first, it's urgent. Ling Xiaozui sprung up without another word, grabbing the purple jade flute in his hand and saying in a low voice, I'll go. Before his words echoed in the air, he turned into a ray of light and sped towards Tiantang City with a deafening clap of thunder. The purple in the sky grew thicker, not diminishing with the passage of time. Ling Xiaozui, who was sprinting at full speed, charged into the purple aura like a ray of light. It was as if he had become one with the purple aura, vanishing just like that. Obviously, Ling Xiaozui knew that the matter was urgent, so he was going all out. Seeing that Ling Xiaozui had finally left, Gu Chaoyang heaved a sigh of relief and plopped onto the ground. Sweat broke out all over him, drenching his clothes instantly. He murmured weakly, I hope I can make it in time. I hope I can make it in time. I must make it in time. Dugu Chou sucked in a breath and pulled Gu Chaoyang up, saying, can you tell me what happened now? Gu Chaoyang exhaled and said, I'm sorry, I still can't say. Dugu Chou said, forget it then. Let's go quickly. Gu Chaoyang was inexplicably agitated due to the series of events just now. His legs were still shaking as he said, carry me. Let's hurry to Tiantang City as well. Perhaps we can catch up to the tail. Dugu Chou said, all right. Let's go. Without further ado, he carried Gu Chaoyang on his back and sprinted towards Tiantang City. Dugu, you have a bad temper but you're still a nice person. Is that so? Thank you for the compliment. Silence ensued. After a long time, Gu Chaoyang said, Dugu, for today's sake, I'll give you a word of advice. Dugu Chou said faintly, this is what I should do. You don't owe me anything. Gu Chaoyang smiled and said, Dugu, I've observed your destiny. You have a calamity of certain death before you that you have to face. As long as you can get through it, there will be no more obstacles in your path to immortality. Dugu Chou dared not neglect Gu Chaoyang's dictum. He said, A calamity of certain death? May I ask how it can be resolved? Since it's a calamity of certain death, I'm afraid it can't be easily resolved. That's not necessarily the case. As long as you find the right person, death can be spared. However, there's only one person in this world who can resolve this calamity of certain death for you. Gu Chaoyang said in a low voice, as long as you follow this person, not only will you be spared from the calamity, perhaps the hope of you and your wife reuniting will also rest on this person. Creak. Dugu Chou's body that was charging forward like an arrow came to an abrupt halt. The soles of his shoes drew 2 deep grooves on the ground as he said, oblivious, what did you say? Chapter 746. Dugu Chou's wife was the love of his life, as well as his greatest regret. Since his wife's death, he had abandoned the title of the world's unrivaled expert and retired from the martial world, living in seclusion. For so many years, he had not been able to walk out of the melancholy of the past. He had long been a guest of the heavens, half a step into the ethereal realm, but for the sake of his lover, he was delayed before the rosy clouds. It was because of his wife that Dugu Cho had given up on his future. Although the rumors might not be entirely true, Dugu Cho's feelings were exactly the same. At this moment, when he heard these words, it was like a bolt from the blue, and it directly shocked him to the point his soul shook and his thoughts were in a daze. Gu Chaoyang was almost flung away from the sudden stop. He said in dissatisfaction, "Watch yourself. Are you trying to buy someone's life?" Dugu Cho asked anxiously, "Who is that? Tell me quickly. Who do I need to follow to meet my wife?" Gu Chaoyang said, "That purple jade." Just as he uttered the word, his expression changed drastically as he cried out urgently, "I don't have anything." Boom. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed in the purple sky, descending from the 9 heavens and landing precisely on Gu Chaoyang's head. Gu Chaoyang cried out, his entire body charred and smoke billowing from his orifices. He fainted without moving. What was strange was that Dugu Cho, who was carrying him and coming into close contact with him, was unscathed. In spite of this, Dugu Cho was still frightened by the sudden turn of events. He stopped abruptly and looked up at the sky. Dugu Cho had never respected heaven and earth, nor did he respect spirits and deities. Today was his first time experiencing the might of heaven and earth at such a close distance, but he was instantly filled with awe. The heavens exist. Dugu Cho told himself quietly before he hurriedly began to treat Gu Chaoyang. He could not understand that Gu Chaoyang had guided him to avoid death and revealed the secret of heaven, thus incurring the wrath of heaven. This was undoubtedly a huge favor indeed. "Thank you, brother," Dugu Cho said quietly. "If I can reunite with my late wife one day, I'll never forget your words of gratitude for eternity." The bound of universe. It was quiet and peaceful at first. However, the winds and clouds suddenly changed, and the entire sky abruptly turned pure purple without any warning. Not long after, the entire bound of universe was plunged into an inexplicable atmosphere of shock. Mountains collapsed and the ground cracked, leaving a scene of devastation everywhere. The bound of universe was a plain that was a level higher than the profound sky continent. Not only did it have a territory that far surpassed the profound sky continent, it also had countless inexplicable places, mountains that even the pinnacle experts could not cross. Wait a minute, however, this strange movement actually caused most of the mountains in this world to suddenly collapse, no longer returning to their original appearance. As many mountains collapsed, many volcanoes erupted, snow-capped mountains and avalanches occurred, and rivers, lakes, and seas flowed backward. Magma gushed out of the ground. In just a short period of time, the bound of universe fell into a state of doomsday. The entire bound of universe was filled with cries of anguish, yet no one knew where this apocalypse had come from. In countless mysterious places, mysterious ancient buildings appeared one after another, as if they were created out of nothing. Then, a mountain peak rose from the ground, from the east to the west, piercing the sky. At the top of the mountain, a stone tablet suddenly appeared out of nowhere, shining brightly. 8 huge words suddenly appeared on it. Millennium Hegemony, Eternal Evil Technique. It was brilliant and dazzling, shining through the ages. Ever since this stone tablet appeared, no one could get close to it. However, the 8 words could still be seen. With the appearance of the majestic mountain peak, the calamities and tribulations in the bound of universe slowed down abruptly. However, another sentence also appeared in the martial world of the bound of universe. Everyone in the entire Xianhuang world was deep in thought right now. Just what in the world did this mean? Heaven and earth unite, stars gather, the supremacies return, heaven and earth change. At the same time, a majestic palace suddenly appeared in an extremely mysterious place in the bound of universe. The bound of universe had changed. It had only been a day, but the entire bound of universe had undergone an earth-shattering change. The entire bound of universe was upended and shaken. Of course, it did not affect the population too much. After all, most of the major changes happened in the deep mountains and swamps. Those places were all deserted. However, it was also because of this that the people who could sense the change in the atmosphere of the world the most were none other than the top-notch experts of the bound of universe who resided deep in the mountains and swamps. They could clearly sense that the spirit chi in the world seemed to have thickened. And it was getting thicker and thicker. Also, the sky seemed to have become taller than it was before. Such a feeling could not be described with words. In fact, one might not even know if it was an illusion. However, the experts had this mysterious feeling. It was hard to prove, but it was real. Then, the heavens and the earth gave evidence. After that upheaval, there were many changes in this world. For example, all kinds of treasures of heaven and earth seemed to have increased out of thin air. Many rare spiritual materials, spiritual plants, and spiritual items that were rarely seen in hundreds or thousands of years in the past appeared in the world. Although they were not to the extent of becoming common goods, they were no longer rare and hard to find. Also, after the upheaval, many cultivators who were at a bottleneck announced that they had successfully broken through and improved greatly. Moreover, this wave of breakthroughs were all at their fingertips, like a hot knife through butter, with no obstacles at all. Originally, all of this had happened in a subtle manner. If it had happened to an individual, the beneficiary would have felt that they had hit the jackpot and become the main character. Their mood would have been good, and their luck would have come. At the very least, it would have been a matter of time before success would have come naturally. Those who kept it a secret all had the same mentality. If they broke through, they would have one more hidden trump card. If they could trick their old rivals at the decisive moment, wouldn't that be the happiest thing in life? Or perhaps they could make those who look down on them look at them in a different light. However, when there were too many such examples, the secret would be revealed by itself. Gradually, it became a state where everyone knew about it, usually, at the moment of a decisive battle between two enemies. Haha, you're the one who took the initiative to challenge me. You didn't expect that I've already broken through, did you? See if I don't F***ck you to death. You, why are you also? F***ck, so you've broken through too. I thought that I've improved greatly and broken through. Otherwise, why would I have this challenge? TSK, so you're thinking the same thing. Scenes like this played out continuously. As for those higher-level sects in the bound of universe, they felt a great danger from this change. It was as if a certain layer of the barrier of this world had been opened. The rumors and legends of the martial world had also reached a new height with this upheaval. Now, whoever obtained a 1,000-year-old spiritual material, or a 10,000-year-old spiritual medicine was no longer rare. Whoever broke through and climbed to a higher level was no longer known. Now, the hottest topic, other than the theory of heaven and earth returning to its origin, was all kinds of unimaginable things. For example, someone said solemnly that he saw a magnificent palace floating in the sky. But how could a palace float in the sky? Then, someone said that it was not that rare to see a palace floating in the sky. He even saw a colorful celestial mountain floating in the sky, and it was floating back and forth. Mountains could also float. Floating palaces in the sky, floating celestial mountains? Was this even possible? However, there were many people who testified to such shocking things. They said that they had really seen it, and more than one person had seen it. As the saying goes, one can see the general trend from a small clue. The changes caused by the upheaval in the bound of universe this time were too great, too far-reaching. All the cultivators were trying hard, or subconsciously, to adapt to the current changes. Of course, with the changes, a new round of reshuffling was also set off. The entire martial world of the bound of universe was in chaos, and it was a complete mess, in a dense forest somewhere in the Tianxian continent. Countless people of the martial world were still fighting for the dragon hide treasure map. At present, it had reached the final stage, the treasure-snatching game. Chapter 747. The two pieces of the dragon hide treasure map had fallen into the hands of the phantom swordsman, Mu Shixiang. Mu Shixiang was a legendary swordsman who had been in hiding in the martial world for a long time. This person had swept through the world with a ghost sword, unpredictable and indescribably mysterious. No one had ever known when or where his sword would be drawn. The only thing that was known was that once the ghost sword was drawn, someone would definitely turn into a ghost. There had never been an exception. That was why he was called the Phantom Swordsman. His reputation was unparalleled throughout the world. It was until the unrivaled swordsman, Jun Moyen, came knocking on his door. After hundreds of moves, the Phantom Swordsman was severely injured and had disappeared from the martial world ever since. However, he was the only two survivors in Jun Moyen's lifetime of swordsmanship. The other one was Bai Shue. He was the lucky one who didn't have much skill back then. Now, however, the Phantom Swordsman had reappeared and snatched the treasure map with a single move. The Phantom Swordsman's might had not diminished, he lived up to his reputation. The martial artists who were besieging him had almost given up all hope and were helpless against him. Seeing that the Phantom Swordsman had taken control of the situation and could escape at any time, becoming the final winner of the treasure map battle, as a matter of fact, the Ghost Swordsman had already done so. With his ghost-like movements, he had already drifted more than 50 kilometers away in an instant, and then mysteriously hid himself in a valley. His body kept changing directions, and he finally entered a dense forest after changing directions 17 or 18 times. It was only when he arrived that the Phantom Swordsman heaved a sigh of relief, feeling that he was safe. Lowering his head to look at the treasure map in his hands, he could not help grinning in delight. With this item in hand, he only needed to find a place to cultivate for a few years. So what if he had to go up against Jun Moyen again? He had to avenge himself. By then, the title of unrivaled swordsman or even unrivaled expert would fall on the head of the Phantom Swordsman, Mu Shixiang. Although he had paid the price of a bloody battle today and was severely injured, it was all worth it. It was then that a strange phenomenon appeared. The phenomenon of heaven and earth suddenly appeared, and the color of everything in the surroundings seemed to undergo a strange change. Even the pure purple sky had changed its hue, it was no longer clear. Such a strange scene suddenly appeared in front of the Phantom Swordsman. Mu Shixiang was shocked to see this. He hurriedly looked around and saw the underworld fog rising in the air, covering the sun and the sky. It even covered the purple sky. How could someone as knowledgeable as him not know who was coming? He said in surprise, Sen Luo. Before he finished speaking, a sword had already appeared in the air, and an extremely cold voice said, "Let me experience the ghost swordsman's skills." The moment the sword appeared, the heavens and earth froze. A white robe fluttered in the air, the sword light was like a thunderbolt in the clear sky. It was Bai Shue who had come on his sword. Mu Shixiang snorted coldly, "Bai Shue, it's you. How can you be my opponent? Do you really think that you can be on par with me just because you survived Jun Moyen's sword?" There was an eerie flash of sword light as the ferocious strike struck Bai Shue's sword. With a long howl, Bai Shue retreated and spun in the air before descending once more. Although he had been repelled by Mu Shixiang's strike, he was not severely injured and was still capable of fighting. At this time, a low voice spoke faintly, "He's not your opponent? What about me?" The voice was filled with the loneliness of being at the pinnacle. A flash of sword light appeared as the voice spoke. It had just appeared, but it was already at Mu Shixiang's throat. Mu Shixiang was shocked. What a fast sword! Seeing that the killing blow was about to land, the Phantom Swordsman dared not be careless. He retreated swiftly, but Bai Shue had already descended from the sky to attack again. Mu Shixiang did not panic even when he was ambushed by the two men in front of him. As the sword in his hand moved swiftly, the sword light suddenly split into two to attack Bai Shue and the mysterious man. He shouted, "Who are you?" The man and his sword turned into a silhouette that drifted left and right, but the sword light was like a downpour as he replied faintly, "The person who will kill you." Facing two attacks at the same time, Mu Shixiang was still a fatigued swordsman despite being a pinnacle swordsman in the world. His body was injured, so he could not help but fall into a disadvantageous position. It was then that a creepy voice rang out, "Ghost door has opened, Phantom Swordsman, quickly, return, quickly." the voice sounded like thousands of ghosts coming out from the netherworld. As the ghostly voice echoed, countless silhouettes appeared. The phantom swordsman was shocked and furious. It's really you guys. Although the phantom swordsman was at a disadvantage against the joint attack of two experts, he was not hopeless. Even when the mysterious man who came later was a pinnacle expert who was no weaker than him in swordsmanship cultivation base, the phantom swordsman was still confident that he could escape with his life. However, with the sudden appearance of Yama's top 10 experts, the situation took a turn for the worse. The phantom swordsman's defeat was already set in stone. There was no turning back. The phantom swordsman hollered in fury and anxiety, "Hold it!" To Mu Shixiang, it was no longer a dangerous situation but a dead end. His only way out was that Bai Yixue and his companion were not on the same side as the concourse of the underworld's assassins. He still had some room to maneuver. In spite of this, how could they slow down when they were all on the same side? It was too late to increase their speed as much as possible, so they all attacked together. With two loud slashes, the phantom swordsman was struck consecutively, 2 spurts of blood spurting out. Mu Shixiang understood immediately that if he did not hand over the treasure map, he would die for sure. In light of this, he could not help hollering in grief and indignation, "I'll give you the treasure map." Stop. In spite of this, the surrounding attacks did not seem to have any intention of stopping. The murderous intent intensified. Mu Shixiang's thoughts raced as he made a prompt decision. With a shake of his hand, he tossed the dragonhide treasure map away. Someone flew out swiftly to catch the treasure map. Then, flames flashed, but they could not burn it. Saber light flashed continuously, but they could not destroy it either. It was confirmed that it was indeed the dragonhide treasure map. After making sure that there was no mistake, he immediately let out a howl that everyone's attacks slowed down. The phantom swordsman, Mu Shixiang, panted heavily and said fiercely, "The treasure map is already in your hands. Do you still want to kill us all?" The 12 of them looked at each other and suddenly laughed. "As you wish, we'll kill them all." Before their words echoed in the air, the 12 of them charged forward once more. However, the attack this time was more than 10 times more intense than before. Shameless, shameless. Ah. Facing such an attack, the phantom swordsman, who was already at his wit's end, let out a pained cry as his head flew into the sky. His soul had gone to the underworld just like that. "Let's go," King Qingguang said. The others retreated and turned into a wraith fog, vanishing abruptly. Bai Yi, we'll discuss this when we get back. Chapter 748. Bai Yi, are these your friends? The mysterious man asked. Yes, master. This mysterious man was Bai Yixue's master, Xiao Shaoqing. Bai Yixue had taken leave from Yunyang and had rushed back to invite his master over. He had been rushing but had unexpectedly encountered the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld here, catching the tail end of the martial world's catastrophe, the final battle. It's a pity that the treasure map has fallen into the hands of the concourse of the underworld. It will be hard to see it again. Xiao Shaoqing shook his head. It was obvious that Bai Yixue's master had a high opinion of the concourse of the underworld's ability and was self-aware enough not to act recklessly, despite the fact that he was the first to cause Mu Shixiang a crisis and the one who had contributed the most in this battle. Master, the treasure map is not important at all. What's important is that Grandmaster is still waiting for you there. Bai Yixue pursed his lips, thinking to himself, isn't it the same for the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld to have the treasure map and for me to have it? However, without young master's permission, he really could not say this out loud, even to his master. Forget it, let's go. When your Grandmaster forgives me, it'll be like a rock has landed on the ground. It's indeed more important than the treasure map. Master is wise. I heard that your young Master Yun has a fine wine brewed by the god of wine, Feng Xianga. Master, you haven't touched a drop of wine for so many years. Why are you drinking today? Hey, kid, what do you know? Master hasn't drunk wine in all these years mainly because your martial ancestor hasn't forgiven Master. If your martial ancestor forgives Master, Master will naturally be able to taste fine wine again and get drunk. Huh. There's such a saying. What else? After getting your Grandmaster's forgiveness, your master will definitely get drunk. I might even use the rest of my life to make up for the deficit of these decades. Only then can my life be considered complete. Cough, 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 Tiantang City. The bizarre but extremely dazzling situation was still going on. The purple in the sky seemed to be getting thicker as far as the eye could see. Now, the residence of 9 Supremes had turned into the largest jewel between heaven and earth. It shone brightly, illuminating tens of thousands of miles and bringing color to the universe. The tornado was like a pillar that pierced through heaven and earth. To be more precise, it was a funnel-shaped chimney that sucked in endless spiritual chi and purple chi before disappearing into the residence of 9 Supremes in an endless stream. However, as time went on, Yin Yang felt more and more tormented. It was difficult for him to cope. Prior to this, he would never have thought that the simultaneous circulation of the 9 Supremes' 9-sex cultivation method would cause such a huge reaction. At this moment, he was completely unaware of what was happening in the outside world. However, he knew everything about his own body. At this moment, he had already watched his muscles slowly swell, slowly increase in size and thickness by several times. In the end, they actually cracked, and his skin and flesh were torn open as they gradually disintegrated. Then, it turned into a drip of recovery, and the body that was repaired became even stronger, as clear as jade, endlessly enduring the endless energy that entered his body like a tsunami. The cycle repeated itself, wave after wave, time after time, round after round. Yin Yang felt that he could sense every nerve and fiber in his body with inexplicable clarity. Right now, even if it was just a strand of hair that was pulled out, the pain would exceed the pain of a finger that he had originally known. What was more, the process of his body shattering and reassembling like this, then shattering and reassembling again and again, he only had one feeling now, was the entire universe exploding and reassembling in his mind. It was too painful. He wanted to clench his teeth, but he suddenly remembered that his teeth had already been crushed. Although they could grow back stronger teeth, it didn't matter even if he crushed them again. They would still grow back. It was completely useless, and it didn't affect the grand scheme of things. Faced with such a situation, Yin Yang gradually felt that he could not hold on any longer. After all, the current fortuitous encounters they'd encountered couldn't simply be described as cruel. The physical body and spirit were both under pressure, and the benefits of being devastated were also great, shocking, world-shaking, and world-shattering. Yin Yang's cultivation base was growing at a rapid pace. First, it was the 9 mystical arts. The other 7 cultivation methods that were lagging behind caught up with him like the rising tide of the sea. They all soared to the current cultivation level of wind and cloud, the 6th level, with a natural progression. Then, the 9 mystical arts stopped temporarily, turning into the simplest growth of mystical chi cultivation base. From the 7th heaven of Tao realm, it soared straight to the pinnacle of the 7th heaven. Then, it was not a bottleneck, but a direct breakthrough. It was a breakthrough without any hindrance, like a powerful arrow piercing through a silk cloak, advancing easily. Then, it continued to grow at a rapid pace, breaking through the 8th heaven and then the 9th heaven. It was like a hot knife through butter. This round of rapid growth lasted all the way to the pinnacle of the 9th heaven before it stopped abruptly. However, the peak of the 9th level of the Tao realm was almost the peak of the profound sky continent. This kind of advancement, this kind of improvement, was not just shocking, it was simply unheard of, it exceeded everyone's knowledge. When the mystical chi cultivation base stopped, the surging pure spiritual chi and innate purple chi locked onto the endless divine art. The endless divine art, which was the hardest for Yin Yang to improve, grew rapidly with the help of the unparalleled spiritual energy, filling up his meridians in an unprecedented manner. At the same time, the countless karmic chi of gratitude and resentment in this world seemed to have been summoned, surging in. It was as if all the villains the 9 Supremes brothers had killed over the years, including the countless souls they had killed on the battlefield, had turned into the karmic chi and gathered here. All these changes and enhancements caused the endless divine art, which had just leveled up not too long ago, to rise all the way to the pinnacle of the fourth tier. As the endless divine arts level rose, Emmy shrieked in excitement. While Yin Yang was pleasantly surprised, his vision darkened as his body began the process of collapse and reassembly once more. What changed at the same time was the lotus of endless fate in the space. The fifth lotus leaf grew, swaying and descending upon the world, the fifth tier. The fifth tier of the endless divine art had leveled up. It was a pity that Yin Yang, who had fallen into a state of complete collapse, was in too much pain. He had no time to check how much he had improved and what benefits he had gained. He had already fainted from the torment of the immense pain. Naturally, he did not know that the endless divine arts improvement did not stop there, but continued to grow, all the way to the pinnacle of the fifth tier. Yin Yang, who had experienced the torment of his physical body collapsing and reassembling multiple times, was overwhelmed. He gradually could not hold on and was struggling to cope. The veins on his forehead were bulging and his temples were throbbing visibly. If there was a third party by his side, they would inevitably be shocked. If this situation continued, Yin Yang's head might explode at the very next moment. He would die instantly and his Tao would vanish. Although Yin Yang had fallen into a semi-conscious state, his cultivation method did not stop operating on its own. The influx of external energy was far from ending as well. As the energy continued to pour in, Yin Yang's 9 mystical arts that had stopped temporarily began operating once more. This time, they advanced simultaneously, soaring to the 7th tier of the 9 incarnations divine art and even breaking through. As if there was some kind of tacit understanding or some kind of special connection, as the 9 incarnations divine art began operating again, his mystical qi cultivation base showed signs of rising again. It was actually a step further than the 9th heaven of the Tao realm. The advancement of the 9 incarnations divine art and the improvement of his mystical qi was a good thing, but Yin Yang was tormented even more during the process of advancement. He was in a coma and waking up again and again, fainting from the pain and waking up from the pain. There was a limit to one's strength. No matter how strong one's willpower was, there would always be a limit. Yin Yang had already reached this limit. A vein on his temple was already bulging as if it could burst out of his head at any time. His eyes were ferocious, the corners of his eyes already torn. Enduring such extreme agony continuously, the endless agony, had given him the urge to end himself, to end all his troubles once and for all. He really could not take it anymore. The agony was equivalent to being sliced and diced by thousands of knives and minced into pieces for more than a dozen centuries. He did not know that at the most critical moment, just as his head was about to explode, a silhouette flew into Tiantang City at the speed of light. In the blink of an eye, the person was already high up in the sky beside the residence of 9 Supremes. The moment the silhouette stopped, there was no hesitation at all as he raised his hand. A gush of dazzling purple qi emitted from his hand, letting out a long cry of joy as it entered the thick fog of the residence of 9 Supremes like a swallow returning to its nest. After the transfusion, there was actually a guest in my house. I drank 2 bottles of beer with him. To be honest, regarding the welcoming sending of guests. Sigh. I can only say that I'm helpless. My head is about to split open and there's a cotton swab on the needle. I told you to do as you please and I won't drink anymore. I really can't stand it. In the end, I replied on the spot, aren't you going to drink with me now that I'm at your house? I'll leave then. Although I shouldn't have, I really wanted to curse at that moment. I really wanted to say, leave then. But, sigh. Being in the secular world is more out of control than being in the martial world. Chapter 749. In the residence of 9 Supremes, the purple qi that was about to condense into a solid substance rose like an explosion. The pure purple color became even darker at this moment. The heaven and earth quaking that had lasted for a long time suddenly disappeared. Yin Yang was in the most agony, the most critical situation. He was already on the edge of being unable to bear it anymore. Suddenly, he felt a jolt in his body. The spiritual qi that came to him on its own was no longer pouring into his body. The changes in his body halted abruptly. He could not help but relax as he exhaled. Then, his body tilted and he lay on the ground, unconscious. This time, he had truly fainted. It was a completely relaxed coma. Finally, it was over. He would not be woken up by the pain anymore. This was his last thought, his current long-cherished wish. To Yun Yang, there were too many surprises, too many unknowns, and too many things that he did not know. He did not know how long it had taken for him to experience this change. He did not know what kind of impact the shocking changes in the outside world had caused. He did not know what kind of danger he had been in just now. If it were not for someone who had come to his rescue from thousands of miles away and delivered him a life-saving treasure, he would have exploded and died. What's more, he didn't know that the spectacular tornado funnel in the outside world was dissipating bit by bit. The purple gas in the sky was also gradually receding. The purple jade-like sky was also rapidly returning to its original state. The clear sky, the blue sky, and the white clouds were once again, only the thick fog that remained in the residence of 9 Supremes was spinning rapidly. As it was compressed, it gradually turned into the same thick purple chi. In the residence of 9 Supremes, the doors of the rooms that belonged to the 9 Supremes that were initially shut had all been opened, absorbing the inexplicably thick purple chi in an almost frenzied manner. Stacks of purple cubes slowly appeared on the floor of the 9 rooms. Each of them was only the size of a brick, and they were enshrouded in a dense purple aura. Looking at them, one could tell that they were not ordinary. Gradually, even in the courtyard and the hall, these purple cubes began to form everywhere. That extremely dense and pure spiritual energy was enough to suffocate anyone who took a whiff of it. No matter what, the change of heaven and earth had finally come to an end. It took 3 days and 3 nights. Later on, when Yun Yang found out about it, he gave these 3 days and nights a name. He simply named it 3 lives, 3 worlds, purple air comes from the east. There was no doubt that the name was fitting. The time calculation of 3 lifetimes was probably the death of 1,000 cuts a day, starting from birth. Even if a lifetime was calculated according to 100 years, Yun Yang felt that it might not be able to match the pain he had to go through this time. As for the east-rising purple chi, the sky was purple on that day, and so was the entire residence of 9 Supremes. The residence of 9 Supremes was still surrounded by many people, including the emperor, the civil and military officials, and the martial artists who had stayed here because of the Dragonhide treasure map incident. Gu Chaoyang and Du Guchou had rushed back as well. Together with Ling Xiaozui who had arrived earlier, they stood high in the air, observing the residence of 9 Supremes and observing the changes. In these 3 days, Yun Yang had experienced 3 lifetimes and countless metamorphoses and improvements, but the ones who had benefited the most were the 3 of them. Ling Xiaozui was the first. Ling Xiaozui had given his all that he had that day, even urging a considerable amount of life force, to rush to the residence of 9 Supremes in Tiantang City. He had sent the purple jade flute into it and put an end to the incident, but he had also benefited tremendously from it. The residence of 9 Supremes' innate purple chi seemed to know that Ling Xiaozui was the key to this incident, so it had given him a portion of it. With Ling Xiaozui's cultivation base and experience, how could he not know that this was an opportunity of a lifetime? He absorbed it at once and cultivated with the help of the spiritual chi atmosphere that was at least 100 times more than usual. Du Guchou and Gu Chaoyang, who had followed closely behind, closed their eyes to cultivate as well, healing their wounds and improving their cultivation base. After all, such an opportunity was a great opportunity that might not even come by once in 1,000 years. There would be time for them to talk and talk. After this fruitless pursuit and sneak attack, as well as the continuous pursuit and ambushes, the 3 of them felt suffocated and angry. They also deeply understood that their cultivation might not be the peak of this world, and that there was no one who could fight against them anymore. After 3 days and 3 nights of focused cultivation, the 3 of them could feel that their cultivation base had increased by at least a level compared to before. Ling Xiaozui was the one with the greatest improvement among the 3 of them. He could be said to have advanced a step further and was once again the unrivaled expert of this world. He was even more deserving of the title. When they felt that the density of the spiritual qi was gradually dissipating and that there was not much meaning in continuing to cultivate, the three of them opened their eyes at the same time. However, when they looked at the massive residence of 9 Supremes in front of them again, the three of them were overwhelmed with an indescribable feeling. If the entire continent was a crown, then the residence of 9 Supremes should be the most dazzling pearl embedded on the crown. There was no doubt that it was irreplaceable. Far away, the wind and clouds surged and howled. An overwhelming murderous aura came from afar, exuding a sense of unbridled savagery. The three of them lifted their heads at the same time, gazing into the distance. They were very familiar with this aura. At least, they were very familiar with it during this period of time, the kind of familiarity that they had come into contact with personally. Their old rivals had arrived. The Four Seasons Tower's experts had arrived. Although they had suffered 2 defeats in succession, the three of them were not afraid in the slightest. The terrifying aura stopped far away and did not continue to approach. There were a total of 18 people from the Four Seasons Tower who had come this time. All of them appeared above the clouds far away, hidden in the mist and looking over with complicated gazes. They seemed to be discussing something and did not launch an attack immediately. The residence of 9 Supremes below was still exuding a thick purple qi, still radiating a radiant glow that illuminated the sky and earth. After a moment of stalemate, a silhouette emerged from among the 18 people. His aura was like a startling rainbow as he hovered above the residence of 9 Supremes, smiling faintly as he said, "The three of you, please." Ling Xiaozui nodded faintly and said, "Liang Canghai, I didn't expect you to still be alive." The person who had come was the masked man in black, Liang Canghai, who had attended the meeting the other day. This person was also one of the most commonly seen substitutes of the Four Seasons Tower's Mr. Nian. In the last ambush, Liang Canghai's injuries were almost fatal. Unexpectedly, he had appeared here unscathed, which was unexpected. Chapter 750. Liang Canghai's eyes stared at Ling Xiaozui for a moment before he turned to look at Du Guchou and then at Gu Chaoyang. His gaze was filled with extreme hatred as he sucked in a deep breath and said, "I'll have to repay the three of you for your great kindness before we can talk about whether I should die or not." Gu Chaoyang sneered and said, "Why are there 3 of you? There should be 4 of you. Have you forgotten that it was Feng Xiang'e who caused your defeat and death that day? He was the one who contributed the most in that battle. If we're your great benefactor, what about him? How are you going to be grateful, to cry tears of gratitude and prostrate yourself before him?" Liang Canghai remained unfazed as he said with a smile, "Brother Gu, an honest man will not resort to insinuations. Is there any meaning to me with your shallow sowing of discord? Compared to me, I'd like to ask the 3 of you to tell me how it feels to be led by the nose like walking a dog, led here and there. How do you feel? I believe that after this experience, the 3 of you should understand that a man's strength is limited. Being the best and invincible in the world doesn't mean that you're truly invincible and number 1, right?" Du Guchou said coldly, "No matter how many twists and turns there are, at least we're unscathed until now. On the other hand, does the Four Seasons Tower really have it easy? Ignorant and arrogant, like a frog in a well." Liang Canghai guffawed and said, "Even if we're ignorant and arrogant, so what? After all, we've toyed with Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou, 2 unrivaled experts in the world, as well as Heaven's Inquisition, who claims to be a fortune teller. We've toyed with them more than once. At least, we think it's worth it." He guffawed and said in an extremely arrogant manner, "It's worth it." Du Guchou's hand slowly pressed on the hilt of his sword, the rage within him rising to its peak. In his eyes, sword light flickered and sword intent soared. Gu Chaoyang coughed and said, "Liang Canghai, you managed to avoid death and prolong your life when you were in a certain death situation that day. It's a testament to your extraordinary luck. However, since you've come here with your true appearance today, I've performed a divination for you out of my curiosity. Are you interested to hear it?" Liang Canghai said mockingly, "Could it be that the heavenly fortune teller has seen some great change again? But why have I heard that the heavenly fortune teller's divination is a secret of the heavens that cannot be revealed? If it could be easily announced, how could it be considered a heavenly secret? Gu Chaoyang guffawed. It is indeed a taboo for fortune-tellers that God's secrets cannot be revealed. However, there is an exception, when the target has been illuminated by the star of death and is on the brink of death. There is no solution whether the God's secrets are revealed or not. You're facing such a bloody disaster right now. This is where you'll fall. What's more, today is the day you, Liang Tsanghai, return to heaven. Liang Tsanghai laughed aloud. A bloody calamity? Land of the fallen? The time to return to heaven? With just the three of you? Gu Chaoyang was still guffawing. After some time, he shook his head and said, all of us intend to take your life, but it's destined that it won't be any of us who will kill you. Don't worry, you're dead today. You must die. Liang Tsanghai sneered and said, all right. Gu Chaoyang, I'd like to see how your heavenly fortune teller will come true. Who else other than the three of you dares to lay a hand on me? Ha ha ha, before his words echoed in the air, he spun and soared into the sky. A ray of light flew out from his hand and turned into a shocking thunderbolt in the blink of an eye. With an ear-piercing shriek, it fell from the sky with an intimidating aura. The target of Liang Tsanghai's attack was the residence of 9 Supremes below. Ling Xiaozui and the other two could see it clearly. Liang Tsanghai was not using the heaven measuring ruler that he was used to, but a gigantic hammer that weighed at least several thousand caddies. At their level of ability, it was no longer a problem for them to move something that weighed several thousand caddies or even tens of thousands of caddies. However, famous experts would always be more mindful of their own status and reputation. In addition, a profound cultivator could turn any plant, wood, bamboo, or rock into a lethal weapon when infused with mystical qi. It was rare to see such a gigantic weapon as a weapon. What was rare was that the gigantic hammer in the hands of a peerless expert like Liang Tsanghai, who had infused his mystical qi to its limit, was like a meteor falling from the sky. Its power was unstoppable. At least, there was hardly anyone in this world who could face it head-on. Any expert would have to evade it, unable to face it head-on. Even if Ling Xiaozui and the other two wanted to stop it, it was already too late. After all, Liang Tsanghai was still hundreds of feet away from them. It was already beyond their reach. The moment Liang Tsanghai swung his giant hammer, he knew that he had succeeded. His body floated up into the air as he laughed heartily. Today's fun is over. 3 old friends, how about we meet again in the pugilistic world? His voice was still ringing in their ears, but he was already retreating hastily. When Ling Xiaozui and the other 2 men saw that the situation had taken a sudden turn for the worse, they were no longer in the mood to entertain Liang Tsanghai. Instead, they focused their attention on the outcome of the giant hammer striking the residence of 9 Supremes. Accompanied by the sound of the void being torn apart, the gigantic hammer smashed into the residence of 9 Supremes that was still shrouded in purple light with a terrifying force. It was obvious that this was the 4 Seasons Tower's test of the residence of 9 Supremes. Back then, Gu Chaoyang had asked Ling Xiaozui to deliver the purple jade flute even if he had to risk his life. This had made Mr. Nian, who had disguised himself as Feng Xiang'e, feel a sense of foreboding. He had not hesitated to destroy his plan and expose his identity just to interfere. It was a pity that he had gone for wool and come home shorn. Not only did he fail to snatch the purple jade flute, he had also paid a heavy price. Even after he had returned, he was still indignant and had sent his men here immediately to test the waters. This was the main reason the 18 pinnacle experts of the 4 Seasons Tower had come together. They were not here for Ling Xiaozui and the other 2. Those who were observant could easily deduce one thing: the residence of 9 Supremes was either at its strongest or at its weakest at this moment. Why would a top-notch expert in the martial world usually find someone to guard him when he was breaking through? It was because that was when he was at his strongest, but it was also when he was at his weakest and most defenseless. It was just a test, and the hindrance was limited. However, if the residence of 9 Supremes happened to be at its weakest, the strike could possibly destroy the entire residence of 9 Supremes, or even destroy Supreme Cloud entirely, eliminating the threat once and for all. That was why Liang Tsunghai had come. Therefore, he had executed the tyrannical slayer and hurled the hammer, but he had retreated at the same time without stopping. This was the way to protect himself. Right before everyone's eyes, the gigantic hammer slammed into the residence of 9 Supremes with a shrill whistle. However, the deafening explosion that everyone had expected did not come, nor did there be a huge impact or tremor. It was like a leaf or a piece of cotton that had fallen into the residence of 9 Supremes. It did not cause the slightest impact, so naturally, there was no sound at all. Chapter 751. In spite of this, it was an extremely abnormal situation. The gigantic hammer that weighed thousands of caddies had been thrown down by Liang Tsunghai, an expert who was almost at the pinnacle of this world. The force, the inertia, and the power of the hammer had to be at least hundreds of thousands of caddies of impact, no matter how conservative the estimation was. Logically speaking, the whole of Tiantang City would have been shaken by the impact if it had taken the brunt of the impact. Why was there no sound or reaction at all? Gu Chaoyang watched Liang Tsunghai, who was retreating in a carefree manner. His gaze was filled with mockery as he said faintly, "Committing suicide." Liang Tsunghai is doomed. Ling Xiaozui was surprised. Committing suicide? How so? Gu Chaoyang nodded slowly and said, "What I said just now was the truth. I really read his physiognomy just now before I spoke of it. He is indeed facing a bloody calamity today. Today, he will definitely fall. There is no chance of survival." Du Guchou and Ling Xiaozui's eyes widened at once. They stared at Liang Tsunghai, who was flying back in a carefree manner, and murmured, This doesn't look like he's going to fall." Committing suicide? How does he commit suicide? F***ck. The expletives came from the 2 peerless experts in unison. Their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets at the same time. The purple light of the residence of 9 Supremes rippled, and then, a giant hammer flew out of the purple light, wobbling as it soared 1,000 feet into the air. With a swoosh, it chased after Liang Tsunghai. The speed made even an expert like Ling Xiaozui feel his scalp tingle. This was because, just as they saw the hammer fly out, Liang Tsunghai's head, who was retreating, had already burst open with a loud crack. His body was still flying back in a carefree manner, but his head was already gone. The giant hammer came to a sudden stop when it hit Liang Tsunghai's headless corpse and fell with a loud boom. Ling Xiaozui and the others had seen the hammer fly. Liang Tsunghai, who was flying backward, should not have seen it. In fact, he had seen it clearly, saw the hammer chasing after him, but he could not react in time and was easily killed by the hammer. Committing suicide, it was truly committing suicide. Liang Tsunghai, the pinnacle expert of his generation, the renowned boundless golden gleam, had died here without a reason. Until his death, he was still showing off his prowess and in high spirits. Until his head was smashed into pieces, he was still elegant, confident, and proud of himself. On the opposite side, the 17 men from the Four Seasons Tower were visibly stirred. A few gasps could be vaguely heard coming from the other side. Despite the unexpected turn, 2 silhouettes moved swiftly like lightning to catch Liang Tsunghai's headless corpse. However, Ling Xiaozui could clearly see the trembling of the other party, bewildered by the current situation. It was only then that the giant hammer landed on the ground with a deafening thud. The ground shook and the entire Tiantang city shook thrice. The 2 men turned their heads in the air, their gazes directed straight at Gu Chaoyang. Although they were far apart and it was difficult for them to inflict any actual damage, the chilliness in their eyes was not concealed at all, it was filled with murderous intent. The 2 men turned to look at Gu Chaoyang from the air. Although they were far apart and it was difficult for them to inflict any actual damage, the chilliness in their eyes was not concealed at all. How can I be blamed? As the saying goes, heaven's wrongs can be avoided, but one's own wrongs can't be avoided. Previously, I revealed the heavenly secret and told him that a bloody calamity was about to befall him, but he didn't take it seriously. Naturally, he asked for it, so how can I be blamed? Do you really think that I, Heaven's Inquisition, am a fraud? A clear voice spoke from the other side. Heaven's Inquisition is indeed unpredictable and has the ability to pry into Heaven's will. Now that I've met you, I'm even more impressed than the rumors. Gu Chaoyang said mockingly, he's just a cannon fodder that you've pushed out to test the waters. What's the point of putting on an act? It's disgusting. If you really think of him as a brother, why didn't you come to test the residents of 9 Supremes on his behalf? On the other side, a few people snorted angrily. One by one, they pressed their hands on their weapons, ready to strike. Gu Chaoyang was still nonchalant as he guffawed, you've scared me to death. You Four Seasons Tower people are amazing indeed. Since you're so loving and brotherly, aren't you going to avenge Liang Canghai now that he's dead? Let's fight together. The one who killed Liang Canghai is the residents of 9 Supremes before us. Go over and avenge him. What's the point of putting on an act over there? A real fight is what matters, do you understand? Gu Chaoyang spat and said in disdain, you're the pinnacle of this world to dare touch the residents of 9 Supremes. Otherwise, you're just a bunch of cowardly bandits. No matter how high your cultivation base is, you're still a bunch of scoundrels. Ling Xiaozui guffawed. Old Gu, you're right. Not bad, not bad. Those who dare not avenge their brothers are scoundrels no matter how high their cultivation base is. On the other side, the 17 men from the Four Seasons Tower were glaring at the trio. Their murderous intent was accumulating like a flood that had been locked for a long time. Once it was released, it would be unstoppable and unstoppable. In spite of this, Ling Xiaozui and the other 2 men were fearless. They continued to taunt and laugh, obviously trying to infuriate them to death. Below them, the residence of 9 Supremes was still glowing with a brilliant purple light. It was unwavering, like an unshakable mountain that faced the world coldly. After a long while, no matter how infuriated they were and how they were taunted, none of the 17 men from the Four Seasons Tower had the thought of attacking the residents of 9 Supremes again. A superb expert like Liang Canghai, an expert of the same level as Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou, had been easily annihilated by the residents of 9 Supremes' counterattack with just one attempt. Would he not be seeking his own death if he went up? Even if all 17 of them were to attack together, they might not be able to achieve anything. They might even be sending 17 more lives to the other party. Ling Xiaozui, Gu Chaoyang, and the others did not hesitate to degrade themselves by taunting the residents of 9 Supremes. Their intention was to trick them into sending themselves to their deaths. How despicable. A cold voice came from afar, Ling Xiaozui, Du Guchou, Gu Chaoyang, will remember what the 3 of you have done today. The mountains don't move, but the rivers and mountains do. The luck of your pathetic escape won't happen again. As soon as the words left his mouth, the speaker continued to order without waiting for a reply, let's go. Chapter 752. Du Guchou's words were vicious, but he hated the person who impersonated Feng Xiang'e to the core. Every word he uttered was bloody and heart-wrenching. There was still no reply from the other side. The 17 men sprung up simultaneously and disappeared into the distance in an instant. Despite their rage and hatred, the 17 men gritted their teeth in anger, but they had no choice but to leave. Tiantang City was not a good place to fight Ling Xiaozui and the others. Other than one's capability, the time and location of the battle between pinnacle experts would also affect the final outcome. Facing Ling Xiaozui and the other 2 men, losing the chance to catch them off guard and losing the advantage of being their home turf meant that their chances of winning were not high. In addition, the mysterious residence of 9 Supremes was here. They could be killed at any time. It was already too many times to commit suicide. No one wanted to be another Liang Canghai. Seeing that the Four Seasons Tower's men had left, Ling Xiaozui snorted and shifted his gaze to Gu Chaoyang. Brother Gu, can you tell us what's going on now? Du Guchou looked over at the same time. The residents of 9 Supremes and the purple jade flute were beyond both of their knowledge. Even though both of them had gained a lot from this incident, they they still felt that it was necessary to figure out the cause and the sequence of events. Gu Chaoyang coughed and sorted through what he knew in his heart before he said, "Actually, I'm confused about this as well. I only have a smattering of knowledge at most. Back then, I was only a very ordinary youth in the mountains, born in a small, insignificant sect, phaseless sect. One day, I went out to run some errands, but when I returned, I realized that the sect had been annihilated. There was no one alive. Even though I was lucky enough to survive, I couldn't escape the fate of being hunted down. I fell off the cliff, my life in danger, but it was then." Gu Chaoyang's eyes glinted with a hint of reminiscence as he said, "It was this purple jade flute that suddenly appeared before me. At the critical moment when I was falling off the cliff, the purple jade flute sent me a message asking, 'Do you want to die?'" Ling Xiaozu and Du Guchou were speechless, stunned on the spot. They had already fallen off the cliff and were still in midair. Who would want to die? How tight would the time be? Did he really have time to think or even answer this question? A bitter smile hung on Gu Chaoyang's face as he said, "I was only a young man who had just stepped into the path of cultivation. Out of an instinctive desire for life, I screamed without thinking, 'I don't want to die, I don't want to die.' Then, the purple jade flute glowed brightly and lifted me up, allowing me to land on the ground unscathed. At that time, I was forced to fall off a cliff and finally landed safely. At that time, I almost went crazy. At least I still had a clear mind. That purple jade flute is not ordinary. After that, the purple jade flute gave me an inheritance. Yes, it was the cultivation technique that I had been cultivating for my entire life. That voice didn't end things after giving me the cultivation technique. Instead, it guided me in detail on how to cultivate it. That 1 month of teaching was an eye-opener. However, a month later, the voice told me that my aptitude was too lacking to inherit its legacy. However, what I had grasped in that 1 month was enough for me to roam the martial world and create a legend. Then, it made me promise solemnly that one day in the future, when I had completed a task, someone would come to inherit the cultivation method that I had learned. By then, there would be hope for my cultivation path to progress further and I would be one step closer to the 9th heaven. Cultivation method? 1 step closer to the 9th heaven? Du Guchou asked sensitively. Yes, this is where I came from. It's just that I can't tell you the name of the cultivation method, Gu Chaoyang said apologetically. Of course. Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou expressed their understanding. We're more interested to know what the voice entrusted you with now. There are 2 tasks that were entrusted to me. The first is to return the purple jade flute when the time comes. Gu Chaoyang said, I've already accomplished this task. It's a pity that I'm not returning it personally. If I were to return it personally, all the benefits outside of the residence of 9 Supremes should belong to me alone. Gu Chaoyang's expression was one of regret. Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou chuckled sheepishly. Indeed, this should have been Gu Chaoyang's opportunity, but it had been shared among the 3 of them. Du Guchou asked with interest, what about the second task? Is it related to the step closer to the 9th heaven that you mentioned just now? Gu Chaoyang answered, maybe it's related. The second thing is for me to assist someone in secret. I've told you all my biggest secrets. I have to bid farewell to both of you now. We shall meet again if fate wills it. A thoughtful look flashed across Ling Xiaozui and Du Guchou's eyes at the same time before it turned into gratitude. The information that Gu Chaoyang had revealed to both of them was too important. Farewell? Where are you going? Asked Ling Xiaozui. Tianxuan's worldly affairs are done. I'm going to the bound of universe to wait for the next opportunity. Gu Chaoyang smiled and said, now that things have come to this, Tianxuan's situation is set in stone. There's no room for change. Even if there are still twists and turns, it's destined that it won't take too long. Perhaps both brothers should plan ahead. The bound of universe. Du Guchou said. Exchanging a glance with Ling Xiaozui, he said, back then, I actually had the chance to enter the bound of universe, but I gave it up. Why? Gu Chaoyang blurted out the question, but he already understood the situation. Back then, he had been delayed by the rosy clouds for the sake of his lover. This was probably the reason. I'm afraid that my wife's soul will be lonely. I've decided to accompany her for 500 years. Du Gucho chuckled humorlessly and sighed softly. Gu Chaoyang and Ling Xiaozue sighed as they exchanged glances. Everyone in the world knew about Du Gucho's infatuation. Even after hundreds of years had passed and hundreds of seasons had passed, his infatuation remained the same. Such a man who was devoted to his love was absolutely worthy of anyone's admiration in this world and would make any man feel ashamed. The bound of universe is not completely unfamiliar to me. However, I want to accumulate more confidence for myself before I go. Even though the incident this time has allowed me to take another step forward, this improvement came too abruptly. I have to make it my own before I can talk about the future. Ling Xiaozue chuckled dryly and said, "The bound of universe is a great world, its level even higher than Tianxian. Experts are plentiful, skilled cultivators and exceptional characters can be found everywhere. While we're all mighty in Tianxian continent, if we go to the bound of universe, even if we're not ordinary martial world nobodies, we won't be at the pinnacle of this world. It's better to plan for ourselves." Du Gucho nodded in agreement, because what Ling Xiaozue was thinking was exactly what he was thinking. Gu Chaoyang looked at one and the other and said with a smile, "What was our initial intention when we first entered the martial world? Don't we have the courage to start all over again when we go to the bound of universe? So what if we can't return to our peak?" The two of them suddenly trembled, both of them were moved by these words. "I'll go to the bound of universe first and wait for you two brothers to come." Gu Chaoyang smiled. "When the time comes." He laughed heartily, turned around, and drifted away. He didn't even finish his sentence before he left. Chapter 753. Yin Yang slowly woke up from his deep slumber. His spirit, qi, and spirit were not complete after the series of extreme torment. It was inevitable that his body would feel hollowed out, but Yin Yang felt an indescribable sense of comfort all over his body now. With just a slight thought, he could cause the yuan qi in his body to surge and flow at will. It was as if he could control it with his fingers. With a slight movement of his body immediately floated up like a feather. It was as if he was weightless, but it was not the weightlessness of losing control. Instead, it was completely under his control. When he carefully felt the surging energy in his body, there was no longer any of the violent feeling of holding it in but not spitting it out. It was only gentle and free to do as he pleased. However, its true power was clearly no less than 100 times stronger than before. It was not fake, it was not fake. Every single pore on his body could breathe on their own and absorb the spirit energy of heaven and earth. With just a slight thought, the spirit energy of heaven and earth in the surroundings would be absorbed into his body and silently and naturally transform into his own true essence without any obstruction. Yin Yang was still in disbelief that he had advanced so much after his breakthrough. He then cultivated and looked within himself to see what was going on. He saw that what was flowing in his meridians was no longer the original spiritual energy but had been converted into a unique spiritual energy that resembled purple chaos. It was endless, even his dantian had turned purple. Even the inner walls of his meridians had an additional layer of purple membrane that was flexible and highly resistant to attacks. Yin Yang tried to channel the spiritual energy in his dantian and realized that the speed of the spiritual qi circulation in his body was at least 10 times faster than before. This improvement is not small at all. It's like ascending to heaven in a single step and becoming a Buddha on the spot. Yin Yang checked his cultivation base again and realized that his 9 mystical cultivation methods had all advanced to the 7th pinnacle while his mystical qi cultivation base had surpassed the 9th heaven of Tao realm. Just like Jilingxi, it had reached an unknown, profound realm. The most gratifying thing was that the endless divine art had also reached the pinnacle of the 5th tier. To Yin Yang, the improvement of his cultivation base was delightful, but there were cultivation experiences to follow. Even though he had reached an unknown level in this world, there was still a direction to go forward. However, the progress of the endless divine art was too difficult. Advancing to another level was often many times more difficult than before. This breakthrough was truly a great opportunity and extremely precious. Emmy was so excited that it was about to go crazy. It swayed and danced in the space, its long tendrils waving rapidly. Perhaps it was too excited that it even uprooted its roots that were deeply rooted in the ground and sprinted around. Its 5 large leaves swayed everywhere, filling the space with layers of green, a delightful sight to behold. Gigi, who had also benefited greatly from this karma, used its wings, which had just grown a thin layer of feathers, to cover its head. It dived into the soil of the space, leaving only its buttocks outside. It was obviously afraid that the overly excited Emmy boss would make a mistake and accidentally knock itself out with one of its vines. Then, extreme joy would turn to sorrow and disaster would fall from the sky. Yin-Yang suppressed his joy and focused his attention on the contents of the newly ascended 5th stage of the endless divine art. The incantation for the 5th stage of the endless divine art was already reflected in his mind, but the current situation made Yin-Yang want to laugh. He had cultivated the 5th stage to its pinnacle without even knowing the incantation. What kind of situation was this? Could it be that the endless divine art had a hidden characteristic that could be achieved in one go as long as one's foundation was sufficient? In spite of this, Yin-Yang studied the incantation in detail and comprehended it seriously. In the end, he was certain that while the natural pinnacle was real, there was still a considerable difference between it and the true pinnacle of the 5th stage that was cultivated step by step. The incantation for the 5th stage, protect the world and peace beyond, where is the murderous heart? The picturesque landscape is dyed with blood, the 5 golden lotuses should always be there. As for the more specific path of cultivation, as well as the things that needed to be taken note of, and so on, they all had to be operated step by step. Otherwise, he would not be able to solidify his foundation, and there would be no hope of advancing to the 6th level. This time, the explosion of the chi of heaven and earth had forcefully imbued his body with cultivation. Although it was thick, pure, and even pure, it was still incomparable to the yuan qi that he had painstakingly cultivated and polished bit by bit. In the end, techniques were the foundation of cultivation. Even if one's cultivation had reached a certain level, it did not mean that one's realm had also increased. This was especially so for a top-notch mystical technique like the endless divine art, which did not allow for too many tricks. Of course, what Yin-Yang lacked now was only a period of cultivating step by step. As long as he corrected it, it would not affect his actual combat power. Actually, Yin-Yang was most interested in the benefits of the endless divine art. Saber Truth, Destiny Blade. In particular, the newly acquired form and 2 styles actually made him feel that some parts seemed to resonate with his previous arrangements. Or perhaps it was too much of a coincidence. Saber Truth, Destiny Blade's 5th form had 2 styles. The first style, Door of Life and Death, the second style, 18 Abysses of Hell. Yin and Yang karma is always in the bosom, this blade opens the door of life and death, don't talk about how ethereal heaven is, 18 Abysses of Hell invite you. Yin-Yang could not help but ponder upon seeing this incantation. Right now, he was working closely with the concourse of the underworld, and there was a high possibility that both parties would continue to work together. He also had plans to tell the 10 kings of hell about the location of the haunting temple that he had discovered. However, it was at this delicate moment that he had broken through to the 5th stage by chance, and the content of the incantation was like this. Although this description could be a concrete representation of the saber's power, could there really be such a coincidental timing for such an incantation to appear? Could it actually be a reminder of something? Yin and Yang karma is always in the bosom, this blade opens the door of life and death, Yin-Yang murmured, door of life and death open. A blade to split life and death? However, the next line, don't talk about how ethereal heaven is, 18 Abysses of Hell invite you, has another meaning that is thought-provoking. A blade to send you to hell? Or 18 Abysses of Hell invite me? Yin-Yang felt that no matter how he explained it, there would be a certain logic to it. Perhaps his collaboration with the 10 Kings of Hell could be extended further. However, all of this needed more concrete evidence. Yin Yang did not slack off, attempting to execute the saber to practice the newly acquired 1 and 2 styles. The moment he tried them out, he had an inexplicable feeling that the 2 styles were out of place. It was not as smooth and natural as the previous few styles. Yin Yang was silent for a moment before he continued to practice. However, he still could not master them despite repeated attempts. The indescribable sluggishness was still present. If such a style were to be used in a battle, the only outcome would be to send himself to his death. There was no chance of survival. He stopped, no longer forcing himself to cultivate, and turned to thinking in silence. Up until now, he had obtained a total of 5 styles and 10 styles of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade. Chapter 754. Yin Yang's mind raced as he began to practice from the beginning, linking all 5 styles and 10 styles together to test it out. The first 4 styles of Saber Truth, Destiny Blade, could be said to be the pinnacle of mastery in this world, perfect and flawless. It was the same for this test. However, just as his saber style was about to end after passing through the mountain of white bones, it suddenly switched to the gate of life and death, as if it was out of his control. With a hum, the air swirled violently in the air, forming a whirlpool. An eerie aura spread out in all directions. Yin Yang was surrounded by specks of starlight, gleaming with saber light. The power of the 5th style had been unleashed inadvertently, but it was unknown whether it was unexpected or within reason. Yin Yang understood it immediately. Without stopping, he performed another style of the 5th style, the 18 levels of hell. At once, the space collapsed in response to the attack, 6 points of spatial collapse appearing simultaneously. It was as if the gates of hell had opened, the wails of ghosts and howls of deities could be heard. At that moment it was as if countless ferocious ghosts had appeared in the air, pouncing over with bared fangs and brandished claws. Yin Yang retracted his saber abruptly, but he had already understood what was going on. I see. He finally understood that the true meaning of the 5th style did not exist on its own, but it was a variation that connected the previous style to the next. Only the activation of the previous 4 styles could create the unique state of the gate of life and death and the 18 levels of hell, triggering unprecedented lethality. It was a variation beyond a variation, a technique beyond a technique. When it came to the 6th style, there should be an even more bizarre change. Furthermore, he had just learned it, so his proficiency in the style was limited. For now, he could only produce 6 points of spatial collapse, which meant that only 6 levels of hell would appear. He would probably need to master this style to be able to summon the 18 levels of hell and truly live up to its name. Thinking of this, he could not help but recall the wails of ghosts and deities just now. Yin Yang was a little excited. If the 18 levels of hell were to open at the same time, how spectacular would that be? From now on, I'll have to train harder and harder. I can't slack off in the slightest. I'll have to squeeze myself a little more. Yin Yang thought to himself, there are too many masters in this world, and there will always be someone better than you out there. With my current cultivation base, perhaps I can be considered a top-notch character in the Tianxian continent, but if I analyze it in detail, it's still far from enough. Whether it's Ji Lingxi's insane father or the legendary 17th Master of the Abyss, the difference is still too great. It had to be said that young Master Yun's horizons had been broadened, and his goals had been raised. Previously, they had only wanted to annihilate the 4 Seasons Tower, but now, their target had changed to the 17th young Master of the Abyss and Ji Lingxi's father. He made up his mind, stood up, and opened his eyes. However, he was shocked by what he saw. As far as the eye could see, it was a sea of purple light that almost blinded Yin Yang. What is this? What's the situation now? Why is it so spectacular? Yin Yang looked at the surroundings of his room. There were purple crystals everywhere, glowing with a violet radiance. Other than the empty space beside him, the rest of the room was filled with these things. Although the tendon of each crystal wasn't big, it was only the size of a palm, but it was still as big as a palm. Yin Yang grabbed a piece and studied it in his hand. He could feel that the purple crystal contained an unusually pure spiritual qi. These are spiritual qi crystals that have materialized. Yin Yang was shocked by his own knowledge. Spiritual qi was formless and formless. Only when it had reached a certain density would it appear milky white, and only when it had reached a certain mystical state would it appear purple. When this state was 100 times denser, the spiritual qi would appear in liquid form. On this basis, when it was 100 times denser, the spiritual qi would solidify. However, what stage would it take for it to completely condense into a cube like this? Yin Yang could not understand it at all. Lifting his head to look around once more, he saw the purple cubes that had piled up like a mountain. At that moment, his mind was blank. How many spiritual qi crystals were there in this room? At the very least, a few thousand would be more than enough for the most conservative of considerations. Yin Yang was even sure that with these purple spiritual qi crystals, even if he went to some realm without any spiritual qi of heaven and earth, it would still be enough for him to take 2 big steps forward. 3 big steps. 5 big steps. Maybe even more. But who put these here? Could it be that someone actually took advantage of the time when I was practicing and entered this room? Yin Yang was baffled, cold sweat dripping from his forehead. These purple crystals weren't here when I came in. Otherwise, I wouldn't have missed them no matter how blind I was. Yin Yang was both surprised and delighted at the same time, but his shock was far greater than his joy. The rewards he had gained from this encounter were unimaginable, and the spiritual crystals before him were even more beneficial. However, when he thought of how someone had approached him silently just now without him noticing, and how no outsider had ever set foot in the residence of 9 Supremes ever since it had appeared, could someone really sneak in? If it was true, then wouldn't his divine ability have already arrived at a shocking level? No matter what he wanted to do to him, he could only wait for death and be at the mercy of his opponent, just like a fish on an anvil. When he thought up to here, how could he not be shocked, terrified, and inconsolable? Filled with doubts, Yin Yang walked out of the room, still shaken. He really wanted to ask, who is it? Who is it? After all, it was a matter of life and death. The earlier he figured it out, the earlier he could die, the earlier he could be reborn. But before he could say these words in his heart, he was stunned by what he saw in front of him. The hall and the courtyard of the residence of 9 Supremes were filled with these purple spiritual crystals. They were densely packed and piled high. With just a glance, Yin Yang had already come up with a terrifying number. There were at least 1 million of them. Yin Yang's mouth was agape, unable to utter a word for a long time. He could even feel that his eyeballs were about to pop out of their frames and fall to the ground. This was a huge amount of wealth. The so-called great wealth was nothing more than this, right? It was enough to surpass everyone's knowledge in this world. Yin Yang was certain that even if all the cultivation resources in the entire Tianxian continent were to be gathered together and all the spiritual qi in this world for hundreds and thousands of years were to be collected, there was an 80 to 90% chance that there would be so many pure spiritual qi crystals. However, they were everywhere in the residence of 9 Supremes now. Even the inside of the courtyard walls were filled with these crystals. The entire residence of 9 Supremes had completely turned into a magnificent palace built entirely of purple spiritual qi crystals. Moreover, this was not all. Chapter 755. Yin Yang turned his head around in a daze. As he scanned his surroundings, he was shaken once more. Other than Supreme Earth's room, the other 8 rooms had all opened their doors. Each room was occupied by the purple spiritual crystals, filling them to the brim. Poof! Yin Yang was so shocked that he lost his balance and fell to the ground. It was the famous state of hitting a rock with an egg. A certain someone had been forcefully instilled with heaven and earth's spiritual energy, had been cleansed both internally and externally, and his physical body had been tormented many times. His clothes were long gone and he was completely naked now. Falling to the ground was, of course, like hitting a rock with an egg. Could this be the real secret of the residence of 9 Supremes? Yin Yang, who was still stuck in the state of hitting a rock with an egg, blanked out. He stared at the purple spiritual chi crystals in a daze, his scalp tingling. I believe that with these resources in front of me, it should be more than enough to make a lord of the starry sky. If it's only the so-called immortal of Earth, why would such a massive amount of resources be needed? Yin Yang murmured, twisting his thigh forcefully. However, no matter how hard he tried, he could not feel the pain. After this huge accident, he was astonishingly unable to feel pain anymore. Oh, my God! Yin Yang panted heavily. He had thought that his cultivation base had skyrocketed so much in one go, and it was a joyous occasion. Now, he knew that the greatest surprise was yet to come. However, when the surprise was too great and exceeded the knowledge of the person involved, it was also a burden. Just like now, the massive amount of resources had far exceeded the limits of Yin Yang's knowledge. It was true that the entire Tianxian continent could not even gather a 10th or 20% of the resources before him, but it was far from enough to make a lord of the starry sky with just these. It was only the conceit of a frog at the bottom of a well. On the other hand, before a frog at the bottom of a well leaped out of the well, the sky he saw was only so vast. It was the same for Yin Yang now. Although he was experienced, knowledgeable, and had many fortuitous encounters, he could not help but be shocked when he saw the purple spiritual chi crystals before him. As far as his current knowledge was concerned, he really couldn't understand what kind of resources, what kind of person, and what kind of magical power was needed to gather so many spiritual chi crystals at once. He didn't even know what they were called, but he had never seen anything so precious in his life. As a result, he was completely stunned. There seemed to be a purple light flickering in the corner of his eyes. It was so dazzling that it hurt. Yin Yang turned around abruptly and looked over. Where the 9 heavens dictum had been, there was now a purple jade flute lying there quietly, glowing brilliantly. Purple jade flute? Yin Yang found it vaguely familiar. Was this not Heaven's Inquisition, the flute that Gu Chaoyang often played with? But why would this flute appear here? Yin Yang walked closer slowly and extended his hand to take the flute down gently. Fiddling with it, it felt warm to the touch and he could not bear to let it go. After a while, an indescribable sense of familiarity rose within him. At that moment, the platform where the 9 heavens dictum had been placed emitted a blurry glow. Then, a graceful red silhouette flew out in a light and graceful manner. The blurry silhouette stood dozens of feet away from him. The red silhouette was blurry, her face indistinct and her body lithe as she stood in the air. No matter how hard he looked, he could not see the face clearly. He could not even get a clear view of the person's physique. However, the elegance, the posture, the aura. Yin Yang understood it without any doubt. There was only one thought in Yin Yang's mind: the person before him was definitely the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. Since the beginning of time, she was unparalleled. She was a beauty that could not be found anywhere else in the world. Just one glance was enough to confirm it. There would not be a second person like her, despite the boundless mystical chi of creation in the vast universe. She only stood there quietly, but she gave off the feeling that she was a fairy dancing in the 9 heavens. It was as if the entire world was swirling and dancing with her dance. However, she did not move. This was the first feeling that rose from the bottom of Yin Yang's heart. It was as if the silhouette before him was filled with a sense of familiarity, a genuine desire to be close and adore. It was an inexplicable sense of joy and contentment. On the hazy face of the red-clothed figure, a pair of eyes seemed to be quietly observing him. Suddenly, she opened her mouth and spoke in an elegant and ethereal voice. "Child, these are all gifts from your aunt. Do you like them?" "Aunt?" Yin Yang cried out involuntarily, his heart thumping wildly and his mouth parched. You're my aunt?" The words that came out of his mouth were just an instinctive reaction. Right now, his mind was in a mess. Since when did I have an aunt? The person before me is my aunt? Where did this come from? He had only considered this point. He had not considered the so-called gifts at all. The red silhouette sighed softly and said, "Poor child, you've suffered a lot along the way." It was a simple sentence, but Yun Yang suddenly had the urge to cry aloud. He was like a child who had been wronged and had suddenly seen his family, someone he could rely on. He could vent the negative emotions in his heart to his heart's content. As soon as he thought of this, his eyes turned red. The red silhouette spoke in an indignant tone, "Your aunt has never liked disobedient and unfilial children. However, if you see your father in the future and want to beat him up to vent your anger, your aunt can make an exception and show my support. There has never been such cruel parents in this world. This is too much. Your aunt's gifts to you are far more than these, but your father thinks that this little bit of support is too much. It's unreasonable, insane, and infuriating." The red silhouette said gently, "Child, your aunt will make it up to you in the future. We have plenty of time in the future. Far more than that." This little bit, even though Yun Yang was mentally prepared, he was still taken aback by the two terms. "You call this a little bit?" The red lady looked at Yun Yang with a gentle gaze and said, "Child, do you have anything to say?" Hearing this, Yun Yang was stunned. His heart was filled with a myriad of emotions. Yun Yang's eyes were red as he asked in a choked voice, "Aunt, who am I? Who are my parents? My father is alive and well, but what about my mother? Who is she?" He didn't know why, but he subconsciously believed the red-clothed woman's words without a doubt. "This is my aunt, there's no doubt about it." Chapter 756. The red silhouette hesitated, obviously troubled by Yun Yang's question. Finally, she sighed and said, "Child, your questions will be answered in the future. Right now, it's the most important and crucial moment of your life. You have to rely on yourself in the future. Your aunt can't help you any more than that. Even for me to come down this time, I had to join forces with many brothers to beat up your father." Yun Yang nodded, feeling much more at ease. For the first time in his life, he felt a sense of security, as if he had roots. "Your father is used to being unreasonable, selfish, cruel, and dictatorial. In short, he's not a good person. I've quarreled with him for so many years because of you." The figure in red seemed to be gnashing her teeth in anger. "Don't worry about your mother either. The two of them were living a carefree and happy life together, but they left their son to suffer. What they did really made Auntie's heart explode with anger. You must avenge Auntie in the future. When the time comes, don't be too harsh. After all, he's your biological father." Yun Yang felt the rock in his heart melt away bit by bit at this moment, his heart filled with joy. He nodded and said with a smile, "Aunt, if there's such a day in the future, I'll definitely avenge you. I'll definitely hit the target. I'll be filial to you and remember your kindness for the rest of my life." The red silhouette said contentedly, "Good child, truly Auntie's good child. Your words have touched Auntie's heart. I won't say any more, I won't say any more. The time that Auntie can appear in this world is limited. I'm leaving now. In this world, you can only rely on your own strength to fight. I've come this time because I've fought with your father. I may not be able to come again. These men's hearts are all made of steel. My heart is as hard as steel, it's never just a saying." Sigh, she sighed softly and looked at Yun Yang longingly, saying, "Child, do you have anything to say? Do you have any private words that you want me to bring to your parents?" Yun Yang was silent for a moment before he said dryly, "I don't know anything now. I have nothing to say. I really have nothing to say." The red-clothed woman's heart suddenly ached. She gently said, "You will know everything in the future. You only need to remember one thing. Before you know these things, you can only rely on yourself in this world. Do you understand?" Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, "I've never relied on anyone. Yes, your father is a ruthless person. He doesn't even recognize his own family. He's not a good person. In this world, you must protect yourself well. If anything happens, it will be real. Do you understand? The red-robed woman was obviously worried, and she repeatedly reminded him again and again. I understand. Yin Yang nodded. If there was an accident, then it would be true. It seemed that this father of his was not an ordinary kind of ruthless person. Listening to his aunt's repeated reminders, Yin Yang finally came to a realization. It seemed that if he were to die in this world, there would at most be someone who could avenge him. As for coming back to life, that was probably impossible. Do I care? The red-clothed woman's silhouette was slowly fading. She seemed to be very dissatisfied with her current state as she muttered a curse. What a cruel thing. His heart has become vicious after finding a wife. Where did the heart he had back then go? He's forgotten about it after marrying a wife. Then, she suddenly said hurriedly, Child, take care. I'm really leaving. Just as the red silhouette disappeared, a finger was suddenly extended and pointed from afar. Yin Yang felt as if his forehead had been touched as an inexplicable message flowed into his mind bit by bit. Then, he felt warm all over, even his heart. Then, he closed his eyes and laid down slowly on the ground, falling asleep. The red silhouette disappeared silently. Only a sentence was left in the air. I'll go back and settle the score with them right now. As long as you don't go up, I'll fight them both. No matter how clever you are, can you have more helpers than me? Do you really think I can't bear to hit you? I'll hit your wife too this time. She murmured to herself, counting with her fingers, 6th, 7th, and the others probably won't dare, but there's still second brother, fourth brother, fifth brother, big sister Z and the rest. It's enough to beat them up. If it really doesn't work, I'll let junior brother Tan go talk to him. Child, with this skill to protect yourself, unless it's an enemy whose cultivation base is 100 times stronger than yours. However, Yin Yang had already fallen asleep, so he did not hear the conversation. After a long time, Yin Yang slowly woke up. He sat on the ground in a daze, looking at the purple jade flute in his hand and then at the stage where the 9 heavens dictum had been. For a moment, a feeling that felt surreal lingered in his heart, lingering for a long time. Just now, could it be a dream? A dream that he had finally tasted, a dream that he had yearned for day and night. But why was it so real? Perhaps it was not a dream. Not only did he have parents, but he also had an aunt? His biological aunt? Then, was he not an orphan? There was a reason for everything that had happened all along the way. All of this still felt like a beautiful dream. Is this real or not? Yin Yang's anxiety grew and spread, strongly suspecting that he had only been in a dream born of his obsession. He sprung up without warning and sprinted all the way out. Looking at the mountain of purple spiritual crystals, he sprinted to each room, repeatedly confirming the authenticity of the crystals. Then, he sprinted back, looking at the purple jade flute in his hand and the place where the lady in red had popped out from earlier, that everything that had happened was real. It was real. Yin Yang stood there in a daze, tears streaming down his cheeks. It's all true, it's all true, it's all true, ha 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 ha. Tears streamed down his face as he suddenly burst into laughter. He felt that his mind was warm, and the loneliness in the depths of his heart had disappeared without a trace at this moment. As for the fact that no one was there to care for him and he could only rely on himself, was this even a problem? When have I, Yin Yang, ever relied on others? Even if you want to care for me, I won't let you. I'll definitely become the world's unrivaled expert in the future. I'll show you. I'll hit you every day. That won't do, I can't hit you. Even if I don't hit you, I'll scare you every day. Well, scaring you doesn't seem to work either. What should I do? Lord Supreme Cloud was being arrogant. As the last bit of haze in his heart dissipated, he was surprised to find a sword style appearing in his mind. This sword technique could be said to be unusually clear, as if it was branded in his soul and could not be erased. It had just appeared in his mind, but as he thought about it, everything was natural and familiar, as if he had practiced this style for centuries. Other than the sense of familiarity, Yun-yang also came to a conclusion: this style was incredibly powerful. Chapter 757. To Yun-yang, coming to this conclusion was extremely absurd. In Yun-yang's cognitive imagination, saber truth, destiny blade was already a flawless and perfect technique. There was no other technique that could surpass it. However, the appearance of this sword technique had shattered Yun-yang's inherent understanding. What harm is there in slaughtering the entire world? Yun-yang could not help but be speechless as he recited the technique's name. Everything else aside, the menacing aura emanating from the technique's name was already too strong. It was appallingly brutal. What harm was there in slaughtering the entire world? It was simply, the intensity of the murderous nature was inconceivable. Although this technique is unparalleled and unrivaled, advancing with an indomitable will, even if the entire world is in front of me, I can only use a sword technique. The only weapon that truly suits me is the saber. Yun-yang pondered, this technique should be a gift from my aunt to me because of that finger. It's a marvelous self-defense technique, truly remarkable. Especially if I'm trapped and can use this technique to break out, it's the best. It looks like I'll have to find a sword for myself. I can use the divine edge to transform it when the time comes. He exhaled deeply, as if he had exhaled all the worries and self-pity in his heart. His state of mind was broadened at once. The sky was high, the earth was high, and the clouds were boundless. How comfortable. How soothing. Yun-yang laughed with his head held high. Holding the purple jade flute in his hand, he stood up and walked out. The breeze was cool and refreshing. Yun-yang felt refreshed all over, his thighs feeling even smoother. He lowered his head subconsciously, but his face and ears were flushed instantly. It was probably because he was too shocked before that everything that had happened was unimaginable. It was hard to imagine that only now did a certain someone realize that he was actually in a meticulously clean state. When his aunt came earlier, he had been sitting on the ground, delirious and wearing clothes. Now that he stood up, his clothes had slipped off and he was truly clean. Luckily, he had only just begun to take big strides. If he were to walk out of the residence of 9 Supremes in this state, he would be too ashamed to continue living. Hurry up and put on your clothes. In an instant, he was dressed in his usual purple robe. A certain someone had once again returned to being an elegant and beautiful young man. Since this boundless wealth is a gift from Auntie, then I don't have to worry about its origin. Now that my cultivation is improving, what I need to do is to strengthen my current foundation. If I continue to blindly pursue progress, it will be more haste than speed. So I'll leave these spiritual origin crystals here first. I'll come and get it when I need it. It was not wrong for Yun-yang to think so. He was the only person in the world who could enter the residence of 9 Supremes now. This was tantamount to his personal treasure trove. It was absolutely safe. Having made up his mind, he put away Supreme Earth's will solemnly and walked out in a carefree manner. However, just as he soared into the sky and turned into a white cloud, with a loud bang, the purple mist instantly filled the sky, instantly covering the surrounding area for several miles. Everyone in the vicinity was blinded, unable to see a thing. Even Ling Xiaozui and the others who had been paying attention to the residence of 9 Supremes could not help but be blinded by the sudden turn of events. The commotion came too abruptly, causing gasps to ring out one after another in an endless stream. With another loud bang, the entire Tiantang city seemed to tremble because of it. Yun-yang, who was directly involved, was shocked to see the residence of 9 Supremes below him sway and fly up. The humongous residence of 9 Supremes had really flown up. Then, the residence of 9 Supremes shrunk visibly and finally turned into a ray of purple light, catching up to him and vanishing. Yun-yang's thoughts spun rapidly as he searched his body. Finally, he found a purple jade pendant the size of a thumb on the purple jade flute. The pavilions and terraces carved on the jade pendant were lifelike, resembling the residence of 9 Supremes. Yun-yang was shaken once more, almost falling from the sky. Was the residence of 9 supremes just a pendant of this purple jade flute? What was the origin of this purple jade flute then? Why had it fallen into Heaven's Inquisition's hands previously, and why had it appeared in the residence of 9 supremes now? Furthermore, he was obviously the true owner of this jade flute, but if Heaven's Inquisition were to quarrel with him, what should he say and what should he do? This was a huge problem. Not only did everything happen abruptly, the course of events was inconceivable and unexpected. Yin Yang felt like he had fallen into a cloud of fog, unable to make sense of it. However, Yin Yang was not dissatisfied with the fact that the residence of 9 supremes could be carried with him at all times in this manner. It was much cheaper for him. Ling Xiaozui and the others had been observing from the outside, wanting to see what was so special about the residence of 9 supremes. Although they knew their limits, it was good to widen their horizons with such a magical object in this world. However, they did not expect the residence of 9 supremes to suddenly explode with a blinding light, blinding everyone who had their eyes wide open. For a moment, they could not see anything. Just when everyone was panicking and unable to control themselves, they felt their vision slowly clearing up, and slowly, they could see something again. When everyone looked again, they were all shocked and turned pale with fright. Where was the residence of 9 supremes? Chapter 758. From a rough estimation, the giant was at least thousands of feet tall. Everyone felt that once the giant opened his eyes, there would be 2 more suns in the sky, intimidating and intimidating. I am Supreme Cloud. I am well, safe and sound. The giant's voice was like spring thunder, rumbling across the land. The residence of 9 supremes is a divine artifact of heaven and earth. The original purpose of its emergence is to stabilize Yutong's providence. It can't stay in the mortal realm for long. Now that Yutong's mystical qi has been established and the nation's destiny is stable, there's no need for the residence of 9 supremes to rely on. Therefore, this supreme has taken the residence of 9 supremes away today. To prevent any mischief, this is my farewell. I only wish for the empire of Yutong to pacify Tianxian, for 1,000 years of peace and prosperity for the nation and its people. His words reverberated throughout the city. Once he was spoken, the entire city could hear him clearly. In fact, everyone within a radius of several thousand miles could hear it clearly. It was so loud that it could be heard from afar. All of Yutong's citizens were shaken, but they were immediately relieved. Everyone had the same thought: yes, a divine artifact like the residence of 9 supremes shouldn't stay in the mortal realm for long. Lord Supreme Cloud is right to take it away. As for why Lord Supreme Cloud could take it away, was this not a question? How could a godly figure like Lord Supreme Cloud not take the residence of 9 supremes? The residence of 9 supremes belonged to Supreme Cloud, so there was no objection to him taking it away. It would be strange if there was someone else in this world who could take the residence of 9 supremes away. A storm that could shake the nation had vanished into thin air with just a few words from Yun Yang. Even His Majesty, the Emperor of Yutong, could never achieve such influence. Listening to his words, looking at the giant in the sky, looking at the faces of the officials around him, and looking at the cheers and joy of the people around them, His Majesty the Emperor sighed softly. Suddenly, the desire to seek out Supreme Cloud and use him vanished without a trace. Enslaving Supreme Cloud? Under such circumstances and with such influence, it would be as easy as flipping a palm for Supreme Cloud to replace him. Wanting to control such a character with the schemes of a monarch was nothing more than a pipe dream. From now on, Supreme Cloud. His Majesty seemed to have untangled a knot in his heart as he said softly, "Do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't harm the empire." Sigh. Your Majesty is wise. Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian bowed at the same time, expressing their support for His Majesty with their actions. His Majesty laughed out loud, shook his head, and said with a sigh, "It's me. Things have been going too smoothly for me recently. Once I had a thought, anger arose in my heart, and wild thoughts arose. It's not too late to wake up today. Qiu Jianhan and Fang Qingtian looked at each other and smiled, feeling as if a huge burden had been lifted from their hearts. All this while, both of them had been suppressing their worries about the conflict between the 9 supremes and the imperial power. His Majesty the Emperor was wise and resolute in his killing. He was undoubtedly a heroic ruler of his generation and was in the prime of his life. In spite of this, the 9 supremes were like gods in Yutong. This was almost a battle between the imperial power and the divine power. Yet, this god was a living, breathing existence, and his abilities were truly remarkable. Once a fight broke out, no matter which side emerged victorious, it would be a catastrophe for the empire of Yutong. The nation would no longer be a nation. Fortunately, this worry was finally gone now. The residence of 9 supremes has disappeared, and Supreme Cloud has vanished from the world as well. It's wishful thinking to want to find him again, His Majesty sighed. He stared at the spot where the residence of 9 supremes used to be, feeling a stabbing pain in his heart. The residence of 9 supremes was still there. Whenever he saw it, it was as if his eldest son was still by his side, but now, the residence of 9 supremes was gone. His Majesty felt an empty space in his heart, an unbearable emptiness. His straight back had inexplicably hunched. Let's go back to the palace. He stood in a daze for a long time before he finally said with a sigh. Old Xiu, accompany me, to the residence of King Yun. His Majesty said weakly, I wish to see Bao. I haven't seen him for a long time. All right. Qiu Jianhan agreed immediately. Supreme Cloud's words traveled leisurely. Some of them were shaken to the core when they heard it. When the 9 supremes are formed, the world is secure, 1,000 years of prosperity, the foundation of all ages. These words had been circulating in the Tianxian continent for a long time. Now that Supreme Cloud, the only remaining member of the 9 supremes, had said something like this, what did it mean? Everyone was deep in thought. Listening to Supreme Cloud's parting words, Ling Xiaozui and the others were relieved as well and were about to leave. Du Guchou sighed, I used to think that Yutong's 9 supremes were nothing but a product of Yutong's people's false rumors, that they were, at most, frauds that deceived the gods and ghosts. Now that I've seen Supreme Cloud today, I realize that the rumors were one-sided. He's really like a god. It's a pity that I can't meet such a hero. Ling Xiaozui was still lost in thought as he said, yes, yes, a clear voice beside him said with a smile, Senior Ling, what do you mean by yes? It's rare to hear you say something like this. Would you be willing to share? Both of them turned to look at the person who spoke. Ling Xiaozui's eyes shone as he smiled sincerely and said, It's you, child. The person who stood not far away from him was dressed in purple, his features as handsome as jade. He was so handsome that he did not seem to belong to the mundane world. He was walking towards the two of them with a smile like an immortal. Who else could it be if not Yun Yang? Du Guchou could hear Ling Xiaozui exhale clearly. It was a sigh of relief. However, how could this child before him be worthy of Ling Xiaozui's attention? Are you all right? Ling Xiaozui asked with a smile as he looked at Yun Yang, his gaze scrutinizing. Yun Yang chuckled. Do I look like I'm in trouble looking like this? I'm fine now. Ling Xiaozui chuckled. It's good that you're fine. Let's go back. We'll talk about it when we get back. Ling Xiaozui returned to his usual self as he chuckled. It was as if nothing mattered to him, as if he did not see anything. Everything in the world seemed so normal to him, but it was a pity that Du Guchou was not having it. He saw the purple jade flute in Yun Yang's hand and his eyes widened. That was the purple jade flute in Gu Chaoyang's hand. The purple jade flute that he had knelt to beg Ling Xiaozui to send to the residence of 9 supremes that day? This purple jade flute had brought Gu Chaoyang's legacy and entrustment, but now, it was in Yun Yang's hands. What did this mean? What did it mean? At that moment, Du Guchou's thoughts were in disarray. He was not feeling well. His mind was in a whirlwind. Did this mean that, as long as I follow this child Yun, I can see my wife? Did this mean that Yun Yang was the person that Gu Chaoyang had hinted at? Chapter 759. Until they returned, De Gucho, a pinnacle expert who had been unrivaled in this world for centuries, was still in a daze. The three of them had traveled much faster than the rest. In addition, the three of them were preoccupied with their own thoughts and did not speak along the way. Yun Yang was counting his gains, reveling in them as he did so. His heart and mouth were beaming with joy, his face glowing as he walked. Ling Xiaozue was also combing through his gains. His improvement this time was significant, equivalent to at least half of a 60-year cycle of cultivation. However, his cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of this world. What could he do to push his cultivation base and combat power to the next level? This was a problem that needed to be solved urgently. De Gucho, on the other hand, was burdened with worries. What should he do after this? How could he hope to fulfill his long-cherished wish? At the entrance of the residence of Yun, Ji Lingxi was standing there, watching with her head raised. Anxiety and worry were written all over her pretty face. Beside her was Shangguan Lingxiu, who looked equally worried. Both of them wanted to go to the residence of 9 Supremes to see what was going on, but Yun Xiaoyao would not allow it. Yun Yang alone is already worrying enough. If the two of you were to go over as well, with so many experts and almost all the pinnacle experts gathered at this critical juncture, just the safety issue alone would scare the wits out of us if the two of you were to go over. No going. With Yun Yang's father, Yun Xiaoyao's strong objection, the two girls, who knew that the situation was against them, could only wait by the door obediently. Lao Mei and Fang Mafei, on the other hand, were much calmer than the rest. They even scoffed at Yun Xiaoyao and the others' anxiousness. Danger? That was impossible. That was Lord Supreme Cloud we were talking about. What danger could Supreme Cloud possibly face? This must be another fortuitous encounter. When he was still so weak, he was already invincible and had limitless opportunities. Now that his cultivation base had risen to the pinnacle of this world, what danger could there be? However, it was a pity that we had to watch over the house. If we could join in the fun, we might even be able to get a share of the loot. After all, they had experienced this kind of opportunity many times. They weren't surprised at all. Instead, they were happy to see it happen. It was only because of old Yun's father's forceful restraint that they could not act rashly. They could not help but grumble inwardly about old Yun's overreaction. It had deprived them of a chance to improve. As for the 4 noble young masters of Dong Tianlong, they were even less worried. They did not even understand what was going on and were playing mahjong leisurely. The faces of the 4 of them were covered with paper slips. These paper slips were not IOU slips, but 10,000 taels of silver per slip. This method was both interesting and exciting. It could even be said that the 4 of them were fighting in full swing without any distractions. To put it bluntly, they were so engrossed in the fight that they wanted to completely overwhelm the others that they did not notice the change of the purple qi. Bai Yixue and his master, Xiao Xiaoqin, had already moved into the residence of Yun and were naturally waiting at the entrance. Bai Yixue looked indifferent, his emotions similar to Lao Mei and Fang Mafei, completely nonchalant. However, Xiao Xiaoqin was nervous, looking down to check his attire and tidying himself up from time to time. Then, he paced around with a frown, his expression conflicted and expectant. It was obvious that he was worried about his gains and losses. Occasionally, clouds of gray fog rose into the air around the residence of Yun. It was the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld coming out to check. Seeing that there was no concrete news, they returned immediately. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, 3 tall silhouettes appeared at the end of the long street, walking side by side. Ji Lingxi and Shangguan Lingxiu looked from afar and heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. The person in the middle was tall, his demeanor was elegant and composed, and he was dressed in a purple robe. Who else could it be but Yun Yang? Ji Lingxi snorted, forcefully suppressing the glint of joy in her eyes. She lifted her head proudly and went back just like that. Shangguan Lingxiu could not help but take 3 to 4 steps forward to welcome him. However, when she turned to see that Ji Lingxi had already gone back, she hesitated for a moment before turning around and going back as well. Yin Yang was initially filled with excitement when he saw the 2 ladies who were deeply in love with him from afar. Just as he was about to go over and greet them, he realized that there was no longer anyone in front of him when he took 4 to 5 steps forward. Yin Yang. Ha 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 ha. Ling Xiaozui could not help bursting into laughter. Yin Xiaoyao, who was also standing by the door with his arms behind his back, said, "Is everything all right? You're back." His voice was calm, as if he was unaffected. "Yes, everything is all right. I'm back," Yin Yang replied with a face full of reverence. That's good, that's good." Yin Xiaoyao smiled. He then nodded at Dugu Chou and Ling Xiaozui before turning to leave without another word. Yin Yang could see that Yin Xiaoyao was completely relaxed at the moment. He walked in without turning his head back, as if he did not care whether Yin Yang returned or not. However, the trail of sweat on his back had already exposed his worry. There was only genuine shock in Yin Yang's eyes, and he remained silent for a long time. "Master." With a cry of sorrow and joy, Xiao Xiaoqing knelt down with a plop and crawled forward frantically. He lifted his head, his face wet with tears. "Master." Sob, sob, sob. "I finally get to see you again today." Xiao Xiaoqing knelt on the ground and hugged Dugu Chou's leg, bawling his eyes out. He refused to get up no matter what. Dugu Chou sucked in a deep breath and tried his best to control his emotions, scolding him angrily, get up quickly. So many people are watching. How improper." "Master, if you don't forgive me, I won't get up." Xiao Xiaoqing bawled. Dugu Chou retorted angrily, "Do you have any shame? You may be shameless, but do I? If I didn't forgive you, why would I ask you to come back? Could it be that I haven't been angry enough? Then, is Master willing to accept me as a disciple again?" Xiao Xiaoqing lifted his head in anticipation. Dugu Chou snorted and said, "If not, how could I allow you to call me master?" Xiao Xiaoqing was overjoyed. He sprung up and said with a grin, "I knew it. This disciple is so handsome and talented. How could Master bear to chase me out?" "Heh, heh." His face was still wet with tears. It was a ghastly sight to behold, but he was actually beaming with joy. Ha ha ha. Yin Yang and Ling Xiaozui could not help guffawing. Dugu Chou could not help sighing, his face contorted as he said, "Xiao Xiaoqing, taking you in as a disciple might be the biggest mistake I've made in my life. I didn't expect that I, Dugu Chou, would make the same mistake again and again." He sighed after that. Forget it. Forget it. My face has long been disgraced by you." Xiao Xiaoqing stepped forward eagerly, grinning as he helped Dugu Chou up. He chuckled and said, "Master, if you don't embarrass your disciple, who should you embarrass? Besides, don't people live their whole lives for this face? Isn't the existence of this face? Isn't it meant to be lost? Went fishing today, wasted a day. I regret it immensely. It would have been fine if I had caught it, but it's a pity that the Air Force commander is dead." Chapter 760. Yin Yang and Ling Xiaozui were dumbfounded by the words. A man had earned his reputation all his life just to prepare to be humiliated? Such an argument was bizarre, but one had to admit that there was a tiny bit of truth to it. A twisted argument was still a reasonable one. Dugu Chou's face turned green in the face of such a wonderful person. He sighed at the sky, speechless. He felt that it was the biggest mistake of his life to allow this fellow back into the school. It was unforgivable. Sure enough, he had lost all his face the moment they met. "Slow down, Master. Master. Master, this disciple has specially brought your favorite Yunshan Maojian this time. This is..." Master, you haven't changed at all these years. You're still as handsome and spirited as ever. Amidst Xiao Shaoqing's incessant flattery, he helped De Gucho to walk into the residence of Yun. Bai Shue followed behind, covering his face with both hands. What can I do? I'm also very helpless to have such a master. De Gucho sighed continuously. He had not even taken 10 steps, but he had already sighed 20 times. He deeply felt that summoning this fellow back this time could very well be the biggest mistake he had ever made in his life. He was really despicable. It wasn't easy for him to expel this scoundrel from the sect and leave the peace and quiet in front of him for so many years. But in his old age, he was muddle-headed and brought him back. Looking at this despicable face made him want to violently slap it. Xiao Shui! Xiao Shui! Xiao Shaoqing called out to his disciple as he served his master. Bai Shue ran over with his head lowered, covering his face. Master, I'm here. Today is a joyous day for you and me. Both of us have been taken in by your grandmaster again. This is a joyous occasion. How can we not celebrate such a joyous occasion? Go prepare 40 to 50 dishes quickly. Make it as grand as possible. Get some fine wine as well. Tonight, I want to have a good time. De Gucho glared at him. What do you want to have a good time for? Xiao Shaoqing choked. Then, he blinked his eyes and smiled. Disciple wants to smell the wine. He. De Gucho heaved a long sigh into the sky. For a moment, a sense of hopelessness rose within him and lingered for a long time. The joy and excitement of seeing this disciple that he had not seen for many years actually lasted for less than a breath, and then it turned into the familiar helplessness of the past. What a sin! Anyone could see De Gucho's exasperation clearly. Ha! Xiao Shaoqing chuckled and followed behind De Gucho like a lackey. His fists massaged his master's shoulders carefully as he turned to glare at Bai Shue sternly, urging him to hurry up. I'll go right away. Bai Shue ran off, crestfallen. Master, this disciple has missed you so much all these years. As Xiao Shaoqing spoke, the rims of his eyes reddened. If I don't get drunk when I see you tonight, this disciple really doesn't know how else to express my excitement right now. Sob. De Gucho glared at him helplessly, feeling too weak to even sigh. Can't you think of anything else other than wine? You're trying so hard to rejoin the school just to lift the ban on your drinking? Brother Dugu, this disciple of yours has a pure heart. That's great. Ling Xiaozue was holding back his laughter until his stomach hurt. If he did not take advantage of the situation to add fuel to the fire and stir up trouble, when would he do so? Who are you, young one? Is there a place for you to speak here? Xiao Shaoqing rolled his eyes and looked at Ling Xiaozue in dissatisfaction. How dare you call my master brother? Do you know who my master is? Do you know who I am? Do you know who my disciple is? De Gucho slapped the back of Xiao Shaoqing's head forcefully, causing the fellow to tumble. He said angrily, how dare you be so rude? This is your senior Uncle Ling. Senior Uncle Ling. Xiao Shaoqing was dumbfounded. Since when did I have a senior uncle? This fellow is obviously younger than me. How can he be a senior uncle? Open your dog eyes wide and look closely. This is your senior Uncle Ling Xiaozue. De Gucho introduced and suddenly flew into a rage, kicking him. B*****, you've been hanging out with your disciple until now and you say you don't know who this is? Why are you acting dumb? Only then did he realize that he had been fooled by this B** of a disciple. Xiao Shaoqing was pleasantly surprised as he turned to kowtow. Senior Uncle Ling, it's you who has come. This disciple has long heard of your name as the world's unrivaled expert. It's a great honor to meet you today. This string of words was said almost without any hesitation. It was said in an extremely familiar and fluent manner. Ling Xiaozui could not help being stunned for a moment before he chuckled and said, "Brother Dugu, your disciple is really as you said, he's truly a marvel. Even though I know that his compliment is a compliment, I still feel honored and overwhelmed with emotion." Dugu Chao's face was flushed. He was embarrassed and angry. This was too shameful. Seeing how the child was still trying to get close to Ling Xiaozui and flattering him without holding back, Dugu Chou was infuriated and went to teach the boy a lesson. "It's fine if you say anything else, but how dare you say that Ling Xiaozui is the world's unrivaled expert? Then what about your master? Isn't he the world's unrivaled expert? Your master is the world's unrivaled expert who has been renowned for 500 years. You've just returned to the school and you're already deceiving your master and ancestor. Who else should I hit if not you? Your father is going to clean the house today and discipline your mouth." Following a certain someone's words and actions, Xiao Xiaoqing was flung around the yard like a rubber ball. His face was swollen and bruised, and he was beyond recognition. When Dugu Chou finally stopped, Xiao Xiaoqing sat in the yard with a bruised face and heaved a long sigh of relief. He lifted his head and sighed, "It feels so good. It's been so many years since I've been beaten by my master. This long-lost feeling has returned. It's still so comfortable." He sucked in a deep breath and tried his best to hold back the smile that was bursting out of his lips. "Get out of my room." Seeing that Xiao Xiaoqing was about to follow him into the room, Dugu Chao's roar was like a thunderclap. Xiao Xiaoqing rolled and crawled out of the room in terror. "It's the school's misfortune. It's the school's misfortune indeed." Dugu Chao's sigh sounded like it could not be washed away by the waves of the endless ocean. Wahahaha, Ling Xiaozui clutched his stomach and laughed until he was out of breath. It had been so many years and this was truly the happiest day of his life. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.